Chapter 87. After receiving Gong Yimo's letter, this was the first time that Gong Dai did not show any joy. The royal sister wanted him to return to the capital. Yes, if he returned to the capital now, he would be rewarded by the emperor. He would have power and money. If he managed it well, money could make the world go round. It would be so cool for him to be a wealthy prince. However, he was not willing to accept it. Now that Lu Yi was ready to make a move, it was very likely that he would take advantage of the heavy snow to make a sudden move and catch them off guard. He could not just leave like this. Putting aside the noble words of innocent people, he wanted more. The 30,000 soldiers in his hands were not enough to satisfy him. Therefore, he had to make a contribution. Using contributions to exchange for power, Gong Dai wanted to find out for himself. Zhenshi of Gojoseon was the first to object. He thought that Gong Dai was just making groundless accusations. A tunnel was nothing. There were many such tunnels between countries. Who would not have such thoughts? Lu Ye's secret visit to Yuheng did not prove anything. Moreover, it was cold here in winter. They did not even have enough food. How could they come here to fight? In the end, he just could not bear to see the people suffer. Zhenshi of Gojoseon had guarded Shizhou for 10 years. There had never been a war here. Once he approved of Gong Dai's idea, the people would have to prepare for war. The new year was the most relaxing time of the year. He did not want to cause panic because of such a shadowy thing. However, Gong Dai did not think so. Judging from the quality of the soil, the tunnel had just been completed. It was obviously dug by Lu Yi to find out more about the situation. If the tunnel had been dug since Lu Ye's secret visit to Yuheng a year ago, it would have been completed not long ago. No food. Could it be that Lu Ye's actions a year ago were not to borrow food from Yuheng? Perhaps they had already reached some kind of agreement. Gong Dai believed in his intuition. Gong Yimo had said before that the human brain would imperceptibly store and analyze a lot of information. That was why intuition was created. Sometimes, intuition could be trusted. But Grandpa didn't believe him. Gong Dai thought for a moment, then suddenly smiled. So what if Grandpa didn't believe him? He decided to do it in secret. Bai Sheng was the first to disagree. Your Highness, since the princess has already arranged everything, why don't you follow her wishes? He really didn't want Gong Dai's idea to come true, because once a war was started, it would no longer be a matter of one person, but a country. Over the past year, he had developed a friendship with the people of Western Zhou. He really didn't want anything to happen. Moreover, the princess asked His Highness to return to the capital and use this merit to fight for the construction of the canal. He heard that the canal could be completed in 2 years. When the time comes, it will be a great merit that will be passed down through the ages. Coupled with the merit of repairing the canal, His Highness's future will be much smoother. The princess painstakingly fought for such a good retreat. Why is His Highness unwilling to do it? Gong Ju naturally understood Bai Sheng's thoughts. He sat on the hill and looked at the endless horizon in front of him. The evening sunset in Western Zhou was particularly beautiful. It was as if the clouds were burning, and it seemed to burn his heart. Gong Dai's cold eyes became calmer and more determined. He slowly said, repairing the canal is naturally a great merit, but now, the crown prince has been in power for a year. If I go, no matter how hard I try, I can't suppress the crown prince. After he finished speaking, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. It wasn't that he didn't want to see Gong Yimo sooner. It had been a year and a half. Had she changed? But he remembered more clearly what he wanted. He wanted his royal sister. He wanted to have the power to intimidate the world. He wanted to have the power to make everyone shut up. This was far from what a rich prince could have. He only wanted military power. Only then could he firmly control everyone's life and death in the palm of his hand. But how can we find out the truth? Bai Sheng was still resisting. He didn't want Gong Dai to take the risk. Gong Dai pulled out the yellow grass under his feet and lightly said, since they can come through the secret passage to check the news, why can't we go through? His idea was so crazy that Bai Sheng didn't refute him for a long time. Using the enemy's secret passage to spy on the enemy's situation? Only the skilled and daring Gong Dai would have such an idea. At night, a group of black-clothed people appeared at the border of Lu Yi. The leader was obviously a young man. His face was covered, and only his eyes were exposed. It was a pair of very cold ink-black eyes. They had just secretly come through the secret passage. After killing the guards at the exit, they found themselves in Liu Ye's territory. Liu Ye's people really did have evil intentions. They actually dug such a long tunnel directly into the country. The people who followed Gong Dai here were all death soldiers. Gong Dai had money and people in his hands, so it was easy for him to train a few death soldiers. It was just that he had such a long-term vision at such a young age. It was as if he could predict the future. The few of them ran quickly in the dark night. They didn't know how far they had gone. "Your Highness, there's a fire in front." Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and looked over. Sure enough, there seemed to be people setting up camp in front. He hurriedly made a hand gesture. Everyone spread out and moved forward. If there were any abnormalities, they would hide and wait for Gong Dai's signal. As such, they quickly approached the fire. Liu Ye's people also spoke Chinese. They looked down on the thin and weak people of the inland and envied their culture. The aristocrats would communicate with each other in the Eagle language. It was considered the exclusive language of the aristocrats to prevent leaks. This camp was obviously not an ordinary one. It was very large, and there were patrols everywhere, as if they were guarding something. Gong Dai stuck close to a stone and looked inside. The tall people were wearing thin armor in such cold weather. Their eyes were looking into the distance, and they were always on guard. Other than the patrol team, the laughter of women could be heard coming from the large tents in the middle. A large bonfire was lit at the entrance. Many people were eating meat and drinking wine around the bonfire. They looked very happy. Gong Dai's heart trembled slightly. Liu Yi really did make a move. Otherwise, why would they set up camp here in the middle of nowhere? He couldn't help but think of a sentence that royal sister had once said, "Before the army moves, the provisions move first." Mengna, how long do you think we have to wait? Looking at the weather, it seems that the first snow is coming. Snow came early in the West Province, and it would last for a few months. The one called Ming Na was a burly man. He drank wine and narrowed his eyes. In a few days, when the army holds the line and the snow comes, we'll catch them off guard. Gong Dai, who was sneaking in, happened to hear his words. Provisions. It was really provisions. His heart trembled slightly, and he hid like a ghost. If this was really a place where provisions were piled up, then there must be countless people guarding it. As expected, the angry voices of Liu Ye's people came from not far away. His people must have been discovered. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes slightly. He knew that this was not the time to show off. He had to hide and wait for an opportunity to make a move. This was a great opportunity that was presented to him. He couldn't resist this temptation. Chapter 88. The sound of footsteps could be heard from all directions. This place was indeed heavily guarded. He sneaked into a small tent in a flash. A woman inside was about to scream when Gong Dai knocked her unconscious and dragged her to a dark place. Soon, the sound of footsteps came over. A man fiercely lifted the curtain and asked, "Inside, did you see anyone suspicious?" A little girl bowed her head in fear. No. Seeing her timid appearance, the man was too lazy to ask and went straight to the next tent. Gong Dai listened attentively for a while and confirmed that the man had gone far. He then stood up and dragged the woman out from under the bed. Liu Ye's hierarchy was very clear, and it could be seen from the clothes he wore. Civilians could only wear dark blue, dark green, black, gray, and other colors. The higher the rank, the brighter the color. The most honorable color was gold, the color of the sun. Just now, he had loosened his hair to cover his face. In addition, he was still young and did not have the handsome figure that he would later have. Moreover, he had casually put on a woman's clothes. At first glance, he looked quite stunning. And this clothes was light purple. But the woman in front of him lived in the most remote tent. It could be seen that she was a songstress. Gong Dai's eyes seemed to be burning. He slightly raised the corner of his mouth and looked meaningfully at the woman in front of him. The woman slowly woke up. Before she could scream, Gong Dai covered her mouth. He showed the purest smile. His black, jade-like eyes flickered under the light of the fire in the tent. "Do you want to make a deal?" The excavation of the canal continued, But because the rumors were getting more and more intense, it made Gong Yimo feel a sense of crisis. She could not help but be more careful with the use of lust, reducing the dosage. From time to time, she would perform a few times in front of people. Many people who came because of the fame were disappointed and thought that the rumors were exaggerated and did not live up to the name. But she still had to do it. She looked up at the huge monster in front of her and was very happy. Such a beautiful steel ship wrapped in metal. Gong Chung would definitely like it, right? She looked at the ship and saw that there was nothing else to add. She could not help but touch her chin and think, should she make a majestic dragon head in front? After all, it seemed that emperors like dragons, right? Gong Yimo decided to do it right away. She planned to personally carve a model for the craftsman to complete. At that time, she would get a super luxurious dragon boat as a birthday present. That uncle definitely hadn't received it before. However, the atmosphere outside was still becoming increasingly tense. Finally, one afternoon, one of Gong Che's most trusted advisors came to look for Gong Yimo. He looked flustered and almost tripped several times when he ran over. Bad news. What happened? Gong Yimo put down the mold in his hand and looked at him with a slight frown. That person's mouth moved, but in the end, he really didn't know what to say. He only said, "You should go to the river and take a look." When Gong Yimo heard this, she hurriedly followed him. In the end, she felt that he was too slow and used her Qing Gong to head towards the river. There were already quite a number of people gathered there. It is said that when King Wu excavated the Jade Dragon Canal, on the day the canal was completed, a bronze cauldron was sunk to suppress the river. Has it been dug out now? That's right. I heard that there are words on it. What words? Rumors flashed past Gong Yimo's ears. When she pushed through the crowd, Gong Che was already there. That cauldron, which was said to be an ancient relic, was covered up. It seemed that Gong Che was preparing to transport it away. However, what was the use of transporting it away now? Gong Yimo took a few steps forward. Gong Che was in a daze and didn't stop her, allowing her to lift up the cover. Indeed, it was a large cauldron with spots of copper. There were 3 sides of the cauldron. One was the head of a cow, a goat, and a pig. It symbolized the sacrifice of 3 animals. Below the cow's head, there were a few very eye-catching words engraved on it. The man who built the canal will bless the world. These rebellious words once again appeared in front of everyone, causing a burst of exclamations. Gong Yimo frowned as she looked at it. Suddenly, she laughed and said, "This was the sacrifice that King Wu gave to the river god after he built the canal. He wanted to use the canal to conquer the world. Why did he cover it up?" Gong Yimo's words caused the crowd to whisper. Just now, they all thought that this was a sign from the heavens that the crown prince should inherit the throne. Hearing Gong Yimo's words, it was more like King Wu's wish to himself. Gong Che's face looked better, but it was still very pale. He and Gong Yimo looked at each other. They both knew that it wasn't important how the people saw this matter. What was important was how the person who passed the news to the emperor would pass on this matter. It was night, the moon was bright, and the stars were sparse. "Brother Crown Prince, how do you plan to deal with this matter?" Gong Yimo couldn't think of any clues, because in her understanding, this was a very small matter. However, in this place, it could be a capital offense. Gong Che frowned slightly. At this moment, he had already thought it through. He planned to rush to the capital through the night. He would first take the water route to Su Yuan's place and then ride a horse. This matter could be big or small. He had to personally explain this matter to the emperor. Also, he hadn't seen his imperial mother for a long time. He also wanted to see her. Presumably, as long as he could arrive in time and explain Gong Yimo's theory of King Wu to his imperial father would feel much better. His idea wasn't without reason. In addition, Gong Yimo didn't have any better suggestions, so she agreed. She stayed behind to continue building the canal. However, the other party obviously didn't want to let them off so easily. Gong Yimo hadn't fallen asleep yet. A burst of hurried footsteps was heard. She quickly sat up. Following that, she heard a burst of crying. What happened? When she came out, she bumped into the person who came to report to her. Not good. The crown prince has been assassinated and his life is at stake. His words were like a warning bell. fiercely ringing in her ears. She hurried into the room, which was full of people. Most of them were the accompanying imperial doctors. "How is the situation?" Gong Yimo asked Imperial Dr. Su, who was checking the Crown Prince's pulse. Imperial Dr. Su frowned and shook his head. "The situation is not good." A sword pierced through the Crown Prince's heart. If he didn't take a Dahuan pill in time to save his life, the Crown Prince will be in danger. Obviously, they were all close officials, but they were assassinated as soon as they left the house. There must be a mole. However, this was not the time to denounce them. Gong Yimo quickly called a person in. This person was the Crown Prince's study companion. He was absolutely trustworthy. "You immediately set off to the capital by land and report to the Emperor about the Crown Prince's assassination. Don't delay." "Yes." Gong Yimo looked at his back as he left. After thinking about it, she still felt that it was inappropriate. She called another person and told him to send 2 people, one by water and the other by land. But even so, she was still very uneasy. She stayed up all night and guarded Gong Che until dawn. Chapter 89. Go that way. Search carefully. That spy won't be able to escape. Put out the fire. Hurry up. Bring water. Why can't the fire be put out? The camp was in a complete mess. Screams, fire, and hurried footsteps could be heard everywhere. Several singers had been hacked to death by angry soldiers, but no one had cleaned up their bodies. A woman had died with her head raised on a haystack, her eyes wide open. If she could still see, she would have found that the culprit who had caused their tragic deaths was hiding in the haystack under her. Gong Dai wiped off the makeup on his face slowly, but his eyes were fixed on the search team that was getting closer and closer. At this time, he was wearing the same black armor as the other party, but his hair was still in a woman's bun. He couldn't move too much, because the armor on his body would make a sound. He couldn't be slow either, because the other party was already in front of him. Finally, when this group of people came closer, he lowered his body. When he saw that they were scattered to search, he waited for a moment when everyone's line of sight happened to shift and quickly came out. With a backhand, he stabbed his sword into the body of the woman on the haystack. Blood splattered on his face, and someone looked at him strangely. He laughed. His face covered in blood couldn't be seen clearly. "I just wanted to see if she was pretending to be dead." After that person heard Gong Dai's explanation, he didn't continue to stare at him, minding his own business in the haystack. And just now, if Gong Dai was a second slower, or a second faster, others would have seen him coming out from the haystack. Of course, if that was the case, he also had a way to deal with it. Just like that, he was extremely daring, and calmly followed the team to search for the person. There were more than 10,000 soldiers stationed to guard the provisions, but Gong Dai saw a few youths who were the same age as him in the team. This showed that Lu Yi had put a lot of capital into this war. Even such a small child was banished to the army. It can be seen that the army they were talking about was definitely no less than 200,000. Because they were young and useless, they were sent here as soldiers to escort provisions. Therefore, Gong Ju was very sure that they didn't know much about each other. But he wouldn't gamble, so the blood on his face and the darkness of the night were his best protection. After searching for a long time, they couldn't find anything. Someone looked at the burning granary with a sullen face and couldn't help but curse. Are those people dead? Why wasn't the fire extinguished? If this goes on, the general will be here soon and none of us will be able to escape. Someone whispered. It's said that wine was used to start the fire. How is that possible? How could the wine catch fire? It is indeed wine. A few days ago, a songstress gave me a recipe that can make wine very strong. It's especially tasty, and the generals especially like it. They drank to their heart's content for a few days in a row. Today, all the generals died at the hands of one person, because they were drunk. That's right. I drank that wine yesterday, and it's very strong. The lords are all very happy. Originally, they wanted to use this wine to make a lot of money after returning to the city, but they didn't expect it to become a death sentence for us. Who knew that the wine could actually burn? This is simply unheard of. Gong Dai, who was following behind them, also had a miserable look on his face, but he was quickly calculating whether he had missed anything. His man caught the woman and asked if she wanted to make a deal. He told her that as long as she could bring him to Luyi when she returned to the country, he would tell her a way to make a fortune. That was distilled wine. One had to know that Luyi and Dayu State were the same. Most of the alcohol was fruit wine and rice wine, and the alcohol content was very low. For a man like Luyi, who was on horseback, drinking it was like drinking water. Therefore, in Luyi, almost everyone would not get drunk after 1,000 cups. But this person said that he had a way to make the wine very strong. If it was true, then it would definitely be very popular in Luyi. The woman's eyes lit up, as if she could see a lot of money rolling in. In the end, she couldn't resist the temptation and agreed because in Luyi, a singer could redeem herself. As long as she had enough money, she would no longer be a plaything. Moreover, she had a plan in mind. If the person in front of her really had a way to improve the wine, she would first trick him and then expose him. If he didn't, then she would directly send him to see the general. No matter what, it would be a great merit. And Gong Dai was just a little girl, so no matter what she did, she wouldn't be able to do anything. Yes, Gong Dai was still young, and her eyes were delicate. Moreover, she had changed her voice with her vocal mimicry, so no matter how one looked at her, she was still a girl. Therefore, the singer sold her body and finally persuaded the manager to allow them to try the method of improving the wine. Gong Dai disguised herself as a singer and used the most basic tools to purify the wine for them. The distillation method was very simple, but after the distillation, a few ingredients were added by those skillful hands, and the wine immediately became clear and rich. When the manager tasted it, it was as spicy as burning fire and as soft as a wave of heat. He was immediately overjoyed. What were they fighting for? Wasn't it for money? With this wine, would they still be afraid of not being able to make a fortune? Therefore, he hurriedly ordered Gong Dai to prepare more. It would be best if he could purify all the wine in the camp. He prepared to recommend it to the generals at the evening banquet. After all, they took the majority of the profits, so he would still get some soup. And the amount of wine in the camp was really plentiful. When fighting in the cold weather, wine was the best thing to keep warm, so naturally, there would be no shortage. Gongju agreed, pretending that he couldn't see the calculating eyes of the steward and the singer. Perhaps they had already conspired. As long as he finished steaming the wine, and they were familiar with the process and techniques, they would take him to the garrison. It was a pity that wealth blinded the eyes, and wealth came from danger. Moreover, they were watching closely, so what could this person do? As expected, Gong Dai didn't do anything. He obediently purified the dozen or so jars of wine and watched them move the wine back to the heavily guarded granary. Gong Dai smiled slightly. After 2 days of observation, every night, a bonfire would be lit around the granary. Not only did it raise the temperature and ensure that the food was dry, it also prevented people from sneaking in under the cover of darkness. Therefore, all of this was so logical and logical. Gong Dai looked at the firelight. His black, jade-like eyes were as dark as an abyss, as if they could suck people in. Sure enough, after 2 days of this wine's popularity, the manager and the singer had also figured out all the techniques of distilling wine. When the general heard the manager's tip-off, he smiled coldly and waved his hand in a daze. He wanted to see this person who seemed to be a spy but had brought them wealth. And it was said that it was a girl? The main tent was always filled with singing and dancing, especially at night. It was as if they were not here to fight, but to celebrate. But ever since Gong Dai's wine, they were intoxicated and didn't know what was going on in the world. When they entered the tent, it was already past 30. The generals in the main tent were all swaying left and right. They didn't even take this little girl, who was suspected of being a spy, seriously. The general in charge of the defense stretched out his hand to Gong Dai. Gong Dai raised his head and smiled sweetly. The moment his stunning face was illuminated by the firelight, several people's eyes were fixed on him, but very soon, it was an assassination attempt that caused a complete mess. Gong Dai alone killed 3 of the generals guarding here and released a signal flare. 8 men of sacrifice attacked from a direction. The soldiers stationed here didn't know how many people came. They only knew that there was a deafening battle cry and a signal flare. They didn't know if there was an army lying in ambush nearby. The entire camp gradually panicked. Everyone was approaching one place. Gong Dai took advantage of the chaos to kill his way to the granary, broke the wine vat, and set it on fire. The wine ignited as soon as it came into contact with the fire. Before the guards could recover from their shock, the fire was already out of control. Even water couldn't extinguish it. The granary, which was enough to feed an army of 200,000 for a month, was instantly surrounded by flames. He was alone, and easily turned an imminent sneak attack into a false illusion. The camp of more than 10,000 people was in chaos because of him, and the culprit was taking advantage of the chaos. That calm and unruffled was something that even a slightly weaker person wouldn't be able to do. Could it be that they had encountered a ghost? She was just a singer. Where could she hide? Chapter 90. Gong Yimo spent the whole night thinking about it. First, there were rumors, then the sacrificial cauldron was dug out, and now the crown prince was attacked by an assassin. This series of events was obviously aimed at the crown prince, but there must be a backup plan. Moreover, there must be a mole among them. Gong Yimo couldn't help but think about the people in the harem. Lucien Fei had power in her hands, and Longue Fei had money in her hands. It seemed that Lucien Fei was more likely to be involved, but Gong Yimo suddenly stood up. Li Ku was the son of the Minister of Revenue, and Longue Fei's father was also a member of the Ministry of Revenue. Could it be that the Ministry of Revenue had colluded to this point? Impossible. Li Ku. She had investigated this person before. He was not the eldest son of the family, but he was ambitious and wanted to make a career for himself. There were many people in the capital who praised him. He was a rare, upright young master. Moreover, his father, the Minister of Revenue, and Longue Fei's father, who was in charge of the Ministry of Revenue, did not get along well with each other. The possibility of them cooperating was not high. Therefore, when Gong Yimo was selecting the younger generation, she recognized Li Ku. As if to prove her guess, a bright imperial edict arrived. Because the crown prince was not in, the crown prince's entourage, Assistant Minister Liu, received the edict. Gong Yimo leaned on the door and listened. The imperial edict actually asked the crown prince to return to the capital immediately. But the crown prince's life was at stake. How could the emperor not care about his son's life? The only explanation was that the emperor was so anxious to see her, not the crown prince. And to see her, it could only be for the sake of the emperor's wife. Gong Yimo admitted that the temptation of the emperor's wife was great, but with the emperor's character, he would not disregard his own child's life to snatch it. The only possibility was that something happened that she didn't know, and changed the whole direction of the situation. When the eunuch left, Assistant Minister Liu held the imperial edict and didn't know what to do. Gong Yimo came over, and he seemed to have seen his savior. He was a man in his 30s. When he saw Gong Yimo, his eyes lit up and he ran over. "Your Royal Highness, what should we do? Your Highness's life is at stake. How can you be tired from the journey? Even if we take a boat, we can't go straight to the capital." Gong Yimo indicated for him to calm down. She looked at the shining imperial edict in the other's hand. After a long time, she exhaled. "Brother Crown Prince definitely can't endure the pain of being tossed around. We can only wait for him to wake up." Assistant Minister Liu's face was bitter. "But the imperial edict ordered us to set out immediately." Gong Yimo smiled helplessly. A trace of determination flashed in his eyes. "Then we can only disobey the imperial edict." Assistant Minister Liu was frightened by her. "That's a capital offense." Gong Yimo shrugged and smiled. "So what?" After saying this, she walked towards Gong Che's room, leaving Assistant Minister Liu standing there in a daze, not knowing what to do. The emperor's imperial edict was very clear. He wanted the crown prince to bring everyone back to the capital to be bestowed with the title. The canal had not been completed yet, so what was there to be bestowed with? Gong Yimo smiled. It didn't matter. No matter what unexpected things happened, this time, she would definitely not let the formula be leaked. Even if someone told on her, so what? It would be discovered sooner or later anyway. Even if Li Ku really betrayed him, even if he really got together with imperial concubine Long behind his father's back, so what? She wasn't angry. Wasn't it just betrayal? But when she thought of the time when they drank and talked, listening to him talk about the future, his eyes full of confidence and high spirits, It made Gong Yimo's heart ache. She really didn't want to believe that he was that kind of person. Gong Yimo took the lead in disobeying the imperial edict. Although the entire group complained, no one objected. Gong Che still didn't show any signs of waking up, and the imperial physician continued to take care of him. Gong Yimo looked at the dark clouds in the sky, and a crazy idea suddenly popped up in her mind. 2 days passed like this. Before Gong Yimo could make up her mind, she heard an announcement. The eunuch who announced the imperial edict came again and brought the emperor's second imperial edict. Gong Yimo hid behind the screen and listened to the eunuch read the imperial edict in a sharp voice. After Assistant Minister Lu heard it, he knelt on the ground and almost fainted. In the end, he gritted his teeth and accepted the edict. The eunuch looked around the room as if he was looking for someone. In the end, he snorted and walked away arrogantly. It's over. The emperor actually suspected that the crown prince had disloyal intentions. Gong Yimo walked out and opened the imperial edict to take a look. It was written in cinnabar in bright red, "Cultivator of the canal, long zay the world." In addition, Gong Che didn't leave in time. The emperor's intention was to question whether the crown prince really wanted to long zay the world. Gong Yimo gritted her teeth. She still hadn't received the news and didn't know if the 2 people she sent out had arrived in the capital. If they had arrived and met the emperor still hadn't arrived and died on the way. When the emperor saw Gong Che disobeying the imperial edict and heard such rumors, he was furious. So he ordered them to return to the capital immediately. She held the imperial edict tightly in her hand and didn't say a word. "Princess, what should we do?" Gong Yimo looked at everyone. Their faces were pale and their legs were trembling. In this era, disobeying an imperial edict was a capital offense. Those who came with the crown prince could be said to have their lives tied to the crown prince. But when they thought of their wives and children in the capital, they hesitated and wanted to return immediately. Gong Yimo saw this in her eyes and remembered it in her heart. Sure enough, Assistant Minister Lu glanced at everyone and whispered, "Since His Majesty is in a hurry and issued 2 imperial edicts in a row, we can't disobey the imperial edict anymore. It's better to set off immediately." As for His Royal Highness, he couldn't think of a way to settle the crown prince for a while. After all, the crown prince was still hanging on by a thread. Who knows what will happen when he goes out? He couldn't care so much. If the emperor got angry, millions of corpses would fall. Their families will also suffer. Gong Yimo glanced at more than a dozen people present. Imperial Dr. Su, Assistant Minister Lu, Imperial Dr. Su, Secretary Li, Gong Gong, etc. These people can be said to be her friends and partners who have been together for more than a year. But at this time, they looked anxious and frowned. They didn't dare to look up at her. Gong Yimo suddenly knelt on one knee. Everyone was shocked. "Princess, why are you doing this?" Gong Yimo blocked Assistant Minister Lu's hand that came to support her. She straightened her back and looked at them firmly. "I am no longer a princess. Now that I am kneeling here, I only have one thing to ask." Assistant Minister Lu glanced at the others and didn't speak. They all thought that Gong Yimo wanted them to continue to resist the imperial edict. At least wait until the crown prince woke up and survived this disaster. But the imperial edict was in front of them. They really can't agree. But they didn't expect Gong Yimo to say, "I promised to set off back to the capital, but not now." Sure enough, Assistant Minister Lu frowned and didn't know how to refuse. Gong Yimo gritted her teeth, knelt down on both knees, and kowtowed to everyone. Chapter 91. Everyone was shocked by this bow. Their brains almost couldn't wrap their heads around it. A person like the princess was actually forced to kneel? Gong Yimo raised her head and begged in a low voice, "Just give me 7 days. After 7 days, everyone will set off immediately. After all, if we set off now, regardless of whether we first take the water route, then the land route, or the entire journey by land, with so many people, it will take 11 or 12 days to reach the capital. I promise everyone that as long as everyone can wait here for another 7 days, I can guarantee that we will reach the capital within 12 days. I beg everyone to believe me this time." How is that possible? Assistant Minister Lu didn't believe her. Gong Yimo looked at him with determination. I will open up the main road within 7 days. We will take the boat back to the capital. Everyone looked at Gong Yimo with suspicion. They all knew about Su Yuan's progress. The last time Su Yuan sent a letter, he said that it would take at least a month to connect to the Longting River and open up the main road. Moreover, the road hadn't been cleared yet. Normal boats would be delayed if they encountered a flood, a strong wind, or a shocking beach. Even if Gong Yimo opened up the main road in 7 days, they might not be able to reach the capital within 5 days. Gong Yimo couldn't explain it. She could only repeat, "Please believe me. I won't let you down. Gong Yimo, will do what I say. Please believe me." She said it with certainty and sincerity. Everyone couldn't bear it. In the end, they still remembered that this princess was also the master who could break a mountain. Perhaps she really had magical powers that mortals didn't have. It was only 7 days. Moreover, the princess promised that they would reach the capital within the normal time. It wasn't considered defying the imperial edict. Moreover, they had already defied the imperial edict once. Then, they would defy the imperial edict again. The few of them reached a consensus without speaking. Assistant Minister Lu helped Gong Yimo up with both hands and sighed softly. "Our lives are all in the hands of the princess. We hope the princess will keep her promise." Gong Yimo smiled brightly, like the blue sky after the rain. She bowed gratefully then. "I will leave first. Brother Crown Prince still hasn't survived the calamity. Please keep your promise." "I promise that I will take a boat to bring everyone back to the capital in 7 days." "We accept the order." Therefore, Gong Yimo did not dare to delay and left immediately. After she left, no one else was in the mood to continue their work. Fortunately, their main road had already reached the Huai River, and they were just building a dam. Now, they could only hope that the princess could really create a miracle and open up the canal in 7 days. The next day, the sun was high up in the sky. Many commoners saw that Gong Yimo and Gong Che had disappeared, so they asked about them. After all, these two people would appear every day. Water Division Supervisor Li let out a long sigh. Right now, he was in a depressed mood. When he heard people repeatedly asking about it, he explained the cause and effect of the matter to the people. But he didn't expect that the people's reaction would be so strong. How could the emperor do this? The crown prince is such a good person. How could he have the heart to rebel? He probably listened to slanderous rumors. Haven't there been a lot of trouble in the capital in recent years? Between the princes, their eyes are about to turn red. The pitiful crown prince's life is still hanging by a thread, and he has to be slandered like this. When Supervisor Li said that Gong Yimo had promised to open up the north and south canals in a week, the farmers beside him heard that, and unexpectedly, none of them refuted. Supervisor Li felt that it was very strange. Why were these commoners' reactions so calm when they all felt that it was impossible? At this time, he heard a man carrying a hoe say loudly, "If it was someone else, I wouldn't believe it. But if it was that young lady, even if she said that she wanted to poke a hole in the sky, I, Denyo, would still believe it." What was even more strange was that the others all agreed. In just a short year, Gong Yimo had created too many miracles. Most of them had received Gong Yimo's grace and sincerely believed that this young lady was indeed not ordinary. When Supervisor Li heard their words, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. "Yes, we are confused. How could there be something that she can't do?" After he finished speaking, he began to talk about Gong Yimo's past identity, including how she rose from the cold palace, how she was favored, how she benefited the people, and how she was demoted. After he finished, he couldn't help but praise himself. The princess was so young, but she had already created so many miracles. Someone said loudly, "So she's the Chaoyang princess?" Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he touched his head embarrassedly. "Isn't it because of my son? He's still studying in a private school. He used to tell us about the Chaoyang princess's deeds. He said that if she didn't improve the papermaking and printing technology, books wouldn't be so cheap. Only the poor can afford to study. If that's the case, she's a saintly figure." In this era, to be able to study was a very honorable thing for the commoners. However, because paper was expensive and printing was difficult, many people could only dream of it but couldn't get it. However, because of Gong Yimo's unintentional action, the threshold for studying was lowered. That was why children from poor families like them could study in school. Many people sighed. Why didn't the emperor like such a smart and good girl? Therefore, Gong Yimo's reputation spread far and wide without her knowledge. Even the water filtration system that she developed and popularized among the commoners was dug up. In the past, people mostly used well water and river water. Although there was no industrial pollution, it wasn't very clean. Didn't they still drink dead rats and fish as usual? Since the water filtration system was developed, the principle was simple. After it was popularized in every village, the number of people who got sick from drinking water decreased a lot. Some wealthier cities even built tap water and sewer pipes in a small area. It was very clean and convenient. There were also people who came back from the West. They also said that the construction of wells and canals in Shizhou was the idea of the Chaoyang princess. Once it was completed, Shizhou would no longer have to suffer from drought. Not to mention, the construction of the canal this time was also the princess's idea. Once it was completed, the North and South would be able to trade. Not only would it solve the problem of water consumption, transportation, and prosperity for the commoners, it couldn't be better. The princess even wanted to push the waterways inland. One had to know that there were many places inland that needed to buy water to drink. If what the princess said was true, and the world was traversed by waterways, the people would no longer have to suffer from drought and floods. If there were natural disasters, they could save themselves. Trade between the North and South would be convenient, and everyone would be self-sufficient. Wait. This Chaoyang princess was talented and intelligent. She was resourceful and broad-minded. As a woman, she could help the world. In the capital, she could be said to be the object of admiration in the hearts of many men. Not to mention that she was only 13 years old. She was really not inferior to a man. She was really a hero from a young age. How could there be people who didn't like such a wonderful woman? Chapter 92. People were more and more concerned about whether the princess could really do what she said to be able to connect the North and South in 7 days. At that time, it would be another great feat that would be passed down through the ages. At the same time, they were more worried that such a princess who served the country and the people would be beheaded by the emperor because she defied the emperor. That would be a loss to the world. Gong Yimo spent 2 days, without sleep or rest, rushing day and night to reach Hengshui. She directly broke into Su Yuan's room. At this time, Su Yuan was also not asleep and was thinking hard in front of the table. When he saw Gong Yimo, he rubbed his eyes, thinking that he was seeing things. "Princess, why are you here?" After saying this, his expression suddenly became strange. What happened? He said it with certainty, as if he knew what would happen. Gong Yimo was extremely tired, but when she heard his words, she instinctively frowned. "What do you know?" Su Yuan was stunned by her question, and a vexed expression appeared on his face. 2 days ago, Lika passed by here. Gong Yimo was already prepared, but when she heard this, she couldn't help but tremble. "It's okay, she was just too tired." Seeing her pale face, Su Yuan couldn't bear it. "Princess, don't be too sad." When Su Yuan said this, he was very angry. We didn't expect Li Ku to be such a person. For the sake of ambition, he didn't even tell his friends to the emperor. 2 days ago, he was ordered to return to the capital. With the emperor's imperial edict, I couldn't stop him. Otherwise, I really wanted to beat him up. There's no need to say anymore. Although Gong Yimo was tired at this time, she was very clear that Li Ku must have sided with imperial concubine Long. Not only did he attack the crown prince, but he also betrayed the fact that she had a huge killing weapon in her hands. No wonder the emperor would give orders one after another. It wasn't that he didn't know that Gong Che was assassinated. It was very likely that the emperor knew that Gong Che was assassinated, but he still couldn't resist the temptation and wanted to get the thing in her hands. Or perhaps it was as she had guessed. Something must have happened that made him want to leave. Gong Yimo closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her eyes were filled with determination. Right now, the emperor wants the crown prince to return to the capital. However, the crown prince has been attacked by an assassin and his life is at stake. Therefore, there is no need to say anything else. I want to open the water route within a week so that Brother Crown Prince can take a boat back to the capital. Otherwise, the Crown Prince will suffer the pain of the bumpy journey and die on the way. Su Yuan was in a difficult position. What should I do? I've also received a decree to return to the capital immediately. Moreover, it's impossible to open the waterway within a week. Princess, why waste your energy? Gong Yimo looked at him deeply. Whether or not it's a waste of effort, you'll know in the future. Forget it, you can go back first. But the men here must stay and serve me. Su Yuan was taken aback for a moment, and then he said awkwardly, but I've already dismissed the farmers today and told them not to come anymore. Gong Yimo frowned slightly but quickly relaxed. It's fine. I have my own plans. You just need to give me the Crown Prince's transfer order and return to the capital. Su Yuan nodded. Don't worry. After I return to the capital, I'll contact my friends to plead for you. No need. Gong Yimo sighed. You just need to tell the emperor that the Crown Prince is about to die. What's the use of saying anything else? Su Yuan felt sorrowful in his heart. Recently, the successive blows had made him very angry and frustrated. Originally, he was about to achieve a meritorious service. He spent more than a year to cultivate to this point and exhausted all his efforts. But because of Li Ke's snitch, all his efforts went down the drain. The Crown Prince was assassinated, and the princess was in trouble. The Grand Canal that benefited the people might be stranded. And all of this was just a fight between the princes for the throne. If it was a normal day, with the emperor's character, he would definitely not tolerate this kind of thing. But Gong Yimo had something that even the emperor was jealous of, and someone used it as bait to tempt the emperor. That was why the situation was like this. Those people were too selfish, too excessive, and too vicious. It wasn't that Gong Yimo wasn't angry, but what was the use? After bidding farewell to Su Yuan, she didn't rest. Instead, she ran all the way to the section of the canal that was being repaired. Because they were digging on land, it was much faster than working in the mud. Su Yuan dug very quickly. At this rate, they could dig to the capital in a month. Gong Yimo stood at the end of the construction and looked north. In front of her was a piece of land that had already been cleared. It extended into the distance. As long as they dug along this river and connected it to the Longting River, it would be enough. It was just that simple. Her ghostly figure went all the way north. From time to time, she would stop to bury something and then continue forward. She did this repeatedly and almost didn't sleep for the whole night. The next day, the people in the towns and villages around Hongshui were awakened by a series of explosions. Bang, 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 bang. The sound was earth-shattering, and it seemed that the house was shaking. The sky was just beginning to brighten. There was no rain or thunder, but the sound was like a series of continuous thunders. What in the world had happened? Was it the mountain god's anger? Or was it an earth dragon turning over? The people in the nearby villages were frightened by the earth-shattering explosion. They gathered at the entrance of the village and knelt in the direction of the explosion. As for the farmers who had been dismissed, when they heard that the explosion came from the river that was being repaired, they hurriedly carried their hoes and ran over. Soon, many people gathered in that direction. Was the heavens angry? Was that sound just now a thunderclap? There were also many timid people who hurriedly packed their bags and ran in the opposite direction. They were afraid that if they were a little slower, they would suffer the wrath of God. However, when the explosion stopped and many people carefully approached, they saw smoke and dust filling the sky. There was a smell of urine everywhere. That kind of movement just now, could it be that someone was setting off fireworks? When the smoke and dust gradually dispersed, many people exclaimed, because the place where they dug the canal yesterday had a road blown up all the way to the north. It had really blasted a path out. One after another, the earth pits were connected, revealing that the earth-shattering feeling just now was not a dream. There really was an unimaginable force that smashed into the ground. Not only did it blow up a big hole, it even loosened the surrounding rocks. It was as if God had sent down divine thunder to repair the canal for them. God has built the canal. God has shown his power. The people who had gathered all knelt down and shouted nonstop. God has built the canal. God has shown his power. Their voices were very loud. and it attracted many of the surrounding residents who were originally terrified. When they saw the scene in front of them, they were all shocked. Towards the unknown, mysterious force, they were convinced from the bottom of their hearts. They were devout and fearful, but at the same time, grateful and kowtowing. God had built the canal. This proved that this canal was approved by God. Maybe God had purposely sent it to the Crown Prince in a dream. That was why the Crown Prince had come to repair the canal, because all of this was God's will. Soon, there were 70 to 80,000 people kneeling by the riverbank, and it was obvious that the number was increasing. Since God had sent down a revelation, how could they, as mortals, go against it? Even the local officials and merchants received the news and hurried over. Seeing such a shocking scene, the parents and officials of Hong Shui knelt down, not daring to be disrespectful. Chapter 93. At this time, the smoke and dust had completely dissipated. Just now, everyone had only taken a glance and didn't dare to look up. Only now did they discover that there was a girl sitting on a huge rock across from them. She was using a sword to support herself on the rock, her head resting on the sword. She seemed to be in a deep sleep. Just now, the deafening shouts hadn't been able to wake her up. She had suddenly appeared in front of the world like a miracle. That kind of mystery made people feel afraid. More and more people arrived, and the sun gradually rose. The local governor seemed to feel that he had seen this girl before, but because of the shock of the scene in front of him, his legs were still trembling. He couldn't stand up for a long time. The moment the first ray of sunlight crossed the horizon and shone on her body, the fairy-like girl's eyelashes moved. No one dared to breathe loudly. They just quietly and carefully knelt on the ground, as if afraid of waking her up. Finally, Gong Yimo opened her eyes. Seeing so many people in front of her, she didn't seem surprised at all. Her calm eyes swept over them. She had a rough idea of how many people there were. At this time, she took out a gold medallion from her bosom. It was the Crown Prince's transfer order that Su Yuan had given her. From today onwards, the officials and people of Hongshui would be at her disposal. Many people looked at the medallion in her hand in a daze. Wasn't that the Crown Prince's transfer order? Shouldn't it be in the hands of Supervisor Su? Why was it in the hands of this little girl? Have you all heard of this saying? Gong Yimo opened her mouth. Because she used her internal energy to speak, her voice wasn't loud. However, every word seemed to ring in their ears, so that everyone could hear it clearly. The migrant workers were still in a daze. They weren't sure if this strange and mysterious girl was an immortal from the heavens. Some people came back to their senses. Just as they were thinking hard about what the other party was referring to, the other party spoke again. Gong Yimo curled her lips into a smile. That kind of mocking evil and disdainful expression appeared on the face of a teenage girl. It made the strange feeling even more intense. Those who cultivate the canal will benefit the world. Her words caused everyone present to come back to their senses. There was no other reason. They weren't far from the capital, so some words couldn't be said casually. A few days ago, someone had been beaten 40 times by Supervisor Su because of this. Supervisor Su also said that anyone who talked about this matter would be sacrificed to the canal. Therefore, no one in Hongshui dared to say anything. But even if they didn't dare to say it out loud, it didn't mean that they didn't talk about it in private. So when Gong Yimo said it, they had such a big reaction. It could be seen that the more they tried to suppress it, the more intense it would be in private. Gong Yimo stood up and stood on top of the stone, looking down at the crowd. Those who build the canal will bring glory to the world. She laughed heartily. Several days ago, the heavens allowed the Crown Prince to dig out this cauldron. It was an auspicious omen. It was the will of the heavens. The heavens are using the Crown Prince to praise the Emperor, to build the canal and bring glory to the world. It's a pity. Gong Yimo sighed. It's a pity that the Crown Prince was slandered because of this. They said that the cauldron was the Crown Prince's intention to disobey the Emperor. Now that the Crown Prince was assassinated and his life was at stake, His Majesty urgently summoned him back to the capital. The Crown Prince couldn't stand the bumpy journey due to his injuries, so he delayed his departure and was charged with the crime of disobeying the Emperor. The canal that was only a month away from completion was delayed because of this. causing the heavens to be furious. Gong Yimo pointed at the hole in the ground and laughed. So the heavens sent down a bolt of lightning to build the canal. This is the best indication. The crown prince is innocent. The canal must be completed. The crown prince can't travel by land due to his injuries and can only travel by water. So at dawn this morning, the heavens sent down a bolt of lightning to open the way. This is the will of the heavens. Not only does it help us mortals, but it also hopes that the crown prince can return to the capital as soon as possible to clear his name. Now that the heavens have opened the way, I am here on the crown prince's orders for you to continue digging. Use 7 days to open the canal. Are you willing to comply with the will of the heavens? Her words rang clearly in everyone's ears. On one hand, the crown prince was wronged, and on the other, in the name of the heavens, the people were afraid and indignant. The crown prince wholeheartedly served the people, but he was wronged. Now that he was in danger, there was no way to return. Even the heavens couldn't stand by and watch, so they sent down a bolt of lightning to open the way. How could they dare to refuse? They all banged their heads on the ground and shouted their willingness. The local governor was a just and honest person. He admired the crown prince for being able to do such a grand undertaking of digging the canal, and he was ignited by the people's passion and shouted loudly. Governor Pu Yucheng of Hongshui will use the entire city's strength to open the canal in 7 days. Welcome the crown prince back to the capital. Welcome the crown prince back to the capital. Gong Yimo smiled. The wind blew her hair, and her clean, almost transparent skin glowed with holy light under the morning sun. She lifted her skirt and knelt on one knee, facing the heavens and saying piously, "All participants will be blessed by the heavens and be safe for all eternity." After she finished speaking, she waved her small hand toward the sky and faced the people, her expression firm and persistent. "So it is. Let's go." Following her command, everyone started to move. Many of them brought hoes and hurried to work, while those who didn't bring anything went home to prepare. Some pushed carts, some pulled plows, some herded cows, and some herded horses. The construction site was bustling again, but unlike the usual task-like work, they worked especially hard this time. This was an instruction from the heavens. Gong Yimo personally received the local governor, Pu Yucheng, and bowed deeply to express her gratitude. Governor Pu is benevolent and righteous. This little girl is very grateful. Pu Yucheng didn't dare to accept her bow and hurriedly helped her up. He finally remembered who the person in front of him was. She was the once famous Chaoyang princess. He sighed in his heart, but said, "Opening the canal is a good thing for the country and the people. Although I'm a small governor, I'm willing to do my part for the country." Gong Yimo nodded. Although she was very tired, she was very grateful. "Thank you. It's just that I'm pressed for time and can't sit down to drink and talk with you. I'm going to bring the crown prince back to the capital now. I hope that the governor can look after him for me." "Definitely." The two looked at each other and smiled, becoming good friends despite the difference in age. And this matter spread to the capital in an instant. Emperor Gong smashed several memorials. Rebellion. Rebellion. Are they trying to rebel? What mandate from the heavens? What will of the heavens? Zhan is the will of the heavens. Changshi lowered his head and stood at the side, persuading in a low voice, "Your Majesty, please calm down." Perhaps she instructed her subordinates to spread false rumors. Spread false rumors? Emperor Gong was so angry that he laughed. What miracle! The heavens building the canal. It's all Gong Yimo's doing, right? That thing in her hand is indeed extraordinary. With her intelligence, how could she not guess why Zhen wants the crown prince to return to the capital? But it's fine if she doesn't hand it over. But now she's going to great lengths to continue building the canal. Could it be that she wants to rebel? She keeps saying that the crown prince is wronged. Or is she building momentum for the crown prince? Chapter 94. The more Gongcheng thought about it, the more uneasy he became. If Gong Yimo still had a large number of such weapons in her hands, it was not impossible for her to directly attack the palace and force him to abdicate. Perhaps she had already reached an agreement with Gong Che to force him to abdicate? Then does your majesty want to stop the governor of Hongshui from continuing to dig? No need. Gong Chung waved his hand coldly. Since he wanted to repair it, then let it be. After all, it was a good thing that it was completed. However, Gong Yimo wanted to wait for the canal to be completed so that the crown prince could take a boat back to the capital. He wanted to see how injured he was. He wanted to take a boat back to the capital. Changshi, I order you to personally deliver the imperial edict and bring the crown prince back immediately. Presumably, as long as the crown prince returned, Gong Yimo would definitely come back with him. As Gong Chung spoke, he threw an urgent report to Changshi with a cold smile. Presumably, Gong Yimo is now running between the two places and still doesn't know about the West Province. Give this to her. Changshi accepted the order and immediately left. As the #1 expert in the palace, Gong Yimo was definitely not his opponent. On the other side, after asking the governor to supervise the digging of the last section of the canal for her, Gong Yimo only took a sip of water and then set off again. Only this time, she was relaxed. She had arranged the most important matter and only needed to think about returning to the capital. As for the crown prince, there should not be a big problem with Assistant Minister Liu and the others taking care of him. Perhaps the crown prince would have already survived and woke up by the time she returned? Thinking about how Gong Che was inexplicably injured and almost died, Gong Yimo felt very guilty. She was too careless. When she returned to the capital, she would definitely teach those people who were behind her a lesson. The more she thought about it, the more sleepy she became. Fortunately, Governor Pu arranged a boat for her to go straight down to the Huai River so that she could rest. The corner of Gong Yimo's mouth couldn't help but reveal a smile. It was because of these people who helped her that she was able to overcome difficulties again and again. Gong Yimo had used Qinggong the entire time, traveling day and night, but it still took her more than 2 days. On the way back, Pu Yucheng saw that she was extremely tired, so he kindly arranged a small boat for her. She slept on the boat for a few hours, and then carefully thought about it. On the 3rd day, she rushed back to the Huai River. The atmosphere on the street was clearly different. Perhaps it was because of the assassination attempt on the crown prince, or perhaps it was because of the 2 imperial edicts. In short, everyone was in danger. Gong Yimo didn't have time to care about others and hurried to the crown prince's residence. But she didn't expect that she would end up with nothing. Where is he? Where did everyone go? Her eyes were red as she looked around. Dr. Su. Secretary Li. He wasn't here. None of them were here. At this moment, one of the guards rushed up to Gong Yimo and knelt down. Princess, it's our incompetence. The crown prince. The crown prince has been sent away. Gong Yimo felt her heart tremble. She reached out and grabbed him by the collar. This was the first time she had questioned him with such a terrifying expression. What did you say? Where is Assistant Minister Liu? Didn't he say that he would guard the crown prince? The man was so scared that his face turned pale. His whole body was trembling as he stammered. After you left, everything was peaceful. Who knew that after a few days, Assistant Minister Liu, who was guarding the crown prince every day, was killed by Gong Gong. Gong Gong also instigated the others and took the crown prince away yesterday. Gong Gong? Gong Yimo couldn't help but recall the counselor who had been standing behind Assistant Minister Liu. It turned out to be him. He killed Assistant Minister Liu. Gong Yimo wanted to vomit blood. She just wanted to rest for a while, so she took the waterway. She trusted those people so much, but she didn't want them to betray her as soon as she left. What about the Imperial Guards? Aren't the Imperial Guards guarding the Crown Prince? The man was almost crying from Gong Yimo's yelling. He said in a low voice. Commander Zhao didn't want to at first, but all the officials had decided. He didn't dare to go against the edict alone, so he acquiesced to the decision and escorted the Crown Prince and the officials to the north. Gong Yimo felt a chill in her heart. In the past, she had drunk wine with Commander Zhao and the others. These people were all men of steel, and they were all friends. Just because Gong Gong killed one person, they all went against their oath and betrayed the Crown Prince. Just because they were afraid of the Emperor and were afraid of going against the edict, they refused to believe her for once? To think that she trusted them so much, to think that they were the Crown Prince's close officials. Gong Yimo felt that the world was spinning. Her body swayed, and she let go of the person in her hand. She quickly calmed herself down. Don't worry, things haven't reached the point of no return. Even if Gong Gong, who took the crown prince away, had bad intentions, he didn't dare to take the crown prince's life at this time. He must have brought the crown prince back to take credit. He just left yesterday, so he certainly hasn't gone far. It's just that Gong Che's life was in danger. If something went wrong, he may die on the road, so she must be faster. Gong Yimo didn't say a word. She chased after them by land. At this time, her eyes were bloodshot. She couldn't see the usual luster. Finally, in the evening, she stopped the group of Imperial guards. Everyone was shocked. They didn't expect Gong Yimo to be so fast. Imperial Dr. Su, Imperial Dr. Su, Commander Li, Gong Gong. Every time Gong Yimo called out a person's name, that person trembled. His legs trembled, and he almost fell to his knees. There was no other reason, because Gong Yimo's appearance at this time was too scary. Her white clothes were stained with a lot of unknown stains, and the corners of her clothes were torn. Her long hair fluttered in the wind. She lowered her head and stared at them with bloodshot eyes. She was smiling and calling their names one by one. A team of more than 2,000 people faced a little girl, but they couldn't even raise a trace of momentum. Finally, when a hidden sword slipped out of her sleeve, Gong Gong was the first to kneel on the ground. He looked frightened and his face was pale. "Where is the crown prince?" As soon as she finished speaking, Imperial Dr. Su quickly said, "The crown prince is in the carriage. We have several layers of bedding." Before he could finish his words, Gong Yimo had already flown into the carriage. At this time, Gong Gong seemed to have recovered. He secretly scolded himself for being useless and quickly ordered the guards to take down Gong Yimo. These 2,000 people were originally ordered by the emperor to protect the crown prince. If they were asked to violate their beliefs and follow the emperor's order to take the crown prince back to the palace, they reluctantly agreed. At that time, when they were asked to take down Gong Yimo, who was like a good friend in the past, Commander Zhao was the first to refuse. Unlike the officials, these people were more simple. They also appreciated Gong Yimo very much. They looked down on Gong Gong's actions, just because they were weak and they were directly under the emperor. They could only obey his orders. It doesn't mean that they won't resist. Commander Zhao snorted and ignored it. Gong Gong's beard was about to stand up. Bold. "I was ordered by His Majesty to send the crown prince back to the capital. You are the Imperial Guards, but you don't listen to my orders." As his voice fell, the curtain of the carriage was suddenly shaken open by Gong Yimo's internal force, revealing the panoramic view inside the carriage. Chapter 95. A few girls screamed. Gong Yimo appeared in front of everyone holding Gong Che, whose face was as pale as a ghost. The two maids who took care of Gong Che fell down the moment the carriage exploded. They quickly knelt on the ground and didn't dare to move. Gong Yimo raised her eyes and covered Gong Che's heart with one hand. Then, she coldly glanced at Gong Gong and others. This glance made Gong Gong no longer dare to clamor. He hid behind the guard commander and didn't dare to face Gong Yimo's eyes. Gong Yimo laughed. It's just that her laughter was filled with endless exhaustion and disappointment. "Why? At the beginning, you all swore to me that you will wait for me and protect the crown prince. But when I left, you all betrayed me. Just because he killed someone and coerced you?" When Gong Yimo pointed at him, Gong Gong's face turned pale. His legs trembled and he almost knelt down. Imperial Dr. Su was ashamed when he heard this. He knelt down in front of Gong Yimo. It's this old man's fault. Rather than being coerced by Gong Gong, it's better to say that this old man really didn't dare to continue to resist the imperial edict. After all, I still have a wife and daughter at home. I have to. As soon as he finished speaking, many people nodded their heads. Secretary Li's face was full of sorrow. "We were really forced. Our relatives are in the capital. If we angered His Majesty, how can they survive?" Gong Yimo laughed. "So, you dare to bring the crown prince back regardless of his life and death? If the crown prince really dies, can your family escape responsibility? I don't know what Gong Gong promised you that you dare to take such a risk." After speaking, she slightly raised her head and closed her eyes. Her voice suddenly became low. She sighed in the wind. I trusted you so much. Why can't you believe me once? Now, Heng Shui works day and night. It will only take a few days to get through the Longting River. As long as we take the waterway, we can return to the capital in a few days. I did it. What about you? What about you? Her words made everyone surprised and ashamed. They didn't dare to look up, but they didn't dare to gamble. Naturally, after Gong Gong had killed Assistant Minister Liu, who had been the most persistent, they had wavered. They had been persuaded by Gong Gong with just a few words and had done as Gong Gong said. Thinking about it now, it was too late for regret. On the other hand, Gong Yimo's subordinates were pouring their inner energy into Gong Che with all their might. Only when their inner energy was almost depleted did Gong Che's originally pale face regain some vitality. Her heart relaxed, but at this time, Gong Gong suddenly pushed the leader of the guards, Commander Zhao. Then, he took out an imperial edict. Commander Zhao, the imperial edict is here. I order you to capture Gong Yimo as soon as possible. Do you dare to defy the imperial decree? Commander Zhao was so angry that his face paled. He had long disliked this Duke Gong. Not only was he a traitor, he even wanted him to deal with the princess. He raised his head and said, My duty is to protect the crown prince. I was ordered to escort the crown prince back to the capital, so I won't listen to your orders. You. Gong Gong was angry and afraid. He was very afraid that Gong Yimo would suddenly explode and kill him. His small eyes almost popped out of their sockets. When the exhausted Gong Yimo heard Commander Zhao's words, her heart warmed slightly. She knew that as long as she caught up, Commander Zhao would definitely stand on her side. He just couldn't disobey the imperial order. Now, as long as they agreed to return to the capital by boat, everything would be fine. Humph, it's fine to not listen to his orders, but what about me? A slightly shrill voice sounded. The white-haired Chang Shi appeared in front of everyone like a ghost. He was still holding the imperial edict in his hand. His sharp eyes shot straight at Gong Yimo. Everyone, receive the imperial edict. Everyone, including the imperial guards, knelt down, but Gong Yimo didn't have any intention of coming down. She just looked at him very coldly. Chang Shi waited for a moment and couldn't help but sigh. He opened the imperial edict and read it out. By the will of the heavens, the emperor decrees that Crown Prince Che has repeatedly disobeyed the imperial edict. From today onwards, he will be temporarily stripped of his position as a prince and his authority over the imperial guards. He will be taken back to the capital and will immediately depart without delay. By the imperial edict. After he finished reading, he sighed again. The crown prince still hasn't received the imperial edict? Gong Yimo suddenly smiled and said, Brother Crown Prince only has one breath left. I'm afraid he can't receive the imperial edict. Her words made Gong Che's face pale. Chang Shi was slightly stunned. Seeing that Gong Che's pale face didn't seem to be fake, he frowned and said, How can it be so serious? Otherwise, Gong Yimo was still smiling. I don't know what the rumors are in the capital. The Crown Prince's reputation is so high that he can shake the emperor? Or is it that the Crown Prince wants to force the abdication and deliberately disobeyed the imperial edict and refused to return to the capital? Chang Shi walked forward a few steps and found that the Crown Prince was indeed very weak. Just as Gong Yimo said, he only had one breath left. He cursed silently in his heart. The capital was now a pool of muddy water. Who knew how many people had a hand in this matter, but no one believed a word. Eunuch Chang Shi. Gong Yimo gently called out to him, just like in the imperial palace, Brother Crown Prince's life is at stake. I want to take him back to the capital by water. I hope Eunuch will permit it. Although Gong Yimo didn't lower her head, Chang Shi still couldn't bear the pleading between the lines. However, he was still loyal to the emperor. Thinking of the emperor's request, he cruelly shook his head. Gong Yimo gently bit her lower lip and said unwillingly, I promise that when the boat reaches Heng Shui, the canal will have been completely opened. It definitely won't delay Eunuch's journey. Eunuch, can't you make an exception this once? Chang Shi thought of the news he received about Heng Shui a few days ago. Heaven had built the canal, causing the emperor to be furious. If Gong Yimo really took the crown prince back on the boat, the emperor would probably be even angrier. So Changshi shook his head again. Princess, please don't make things difficult for me. Let me take the crown prince first. Princess, don't worry. With my internal energy protecting me along the way, nothing will happen to the crown prince. Ha ha ha. His resolute attitude and words made Gong Yimo laugh. She laughed until she couldn't hold back her anger. How interesting. Even if Changshi were to escort Gong Che all the way back to the capital with his life hanging on by a thread, if he were to return to the capital in this state, he would be a sinner. He might even be accused of treason by those princes who were eyeing him covetously. What was the difference between dying and not dying at that time? Don't talk about building the canal and becoming famous all over the world. Not only would there be no merit, but he would also die with infamy. And she, Gong Yimo, had worked so hard for so long. Gong Che had worked so hard for so long. It wasn't for them to waste all their previous efforts. Seeing that Gong Yimo didn't move, Changshi frowned slightly. Princess, don't tell me you want to defy the edict for the third time? Gong Yimo secretly held her hidden blade in one hand. She raised her head and laughed. Why not? Changshi shook his head slightly. At this time, the wind rustled through the trees, mixing with his sigh. Don't tell me, Princess, don't care about the life and death of His Highness the Ninth Prince? Gong Yimo's expression changed slightly. What does this have to do with Gong Dai? Changshi handed an urgent report to Gong Yimo. She immediately took it and skimmed through it. The more she read, the more shocked she was. It turned out that Gong Dai, he actually didn't listen to her and Jinshi of Gojoseon's advice and brought people to infiltrate Lu Yi to investigate. Chapter 96. Why did he do this? Why? He did not stop there. It turned out that Lu Yi really did make a move, but it was seen through by Gong Dai. Gong Dai killed the guards by himself, burned the provisions, and turned a sneak attack into nothing. But Lu Ye's army arrived in advance, and Gong Dai was chased all the way. In the end, Lu Ye's army forced into the barren miasma plain and never appeared again. Changshi saw Gong Yimo's frightened expression and timely said, "The barren miasma plain is a natural barrier between the two countries. It is also a place of death. His Highness has been lost in it for 7 or 8 days. His Majesty's meaning is very clear. If Princess can hand over that thing, His Majesty will immediately send the most elite light cavalry to rescue His Highness. If not," Gong Yimo's knuckles turned white. She squeezed the urgent report and forced a smile. If not, Princess can only pray that His Highness is lucky. Ha 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 ha. Gong Yimo could not help but laugh. She raised the urgent report and her eyes were filled with disbelief. Did I hear wrongly? Gong Dai made such a miraculous contribution. Instead of saving him, you use him to threaten me? Ha 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 ha. Interesting, interesting. Presumably, Emperor Gong heard Li Ku exaggerating the power of the barren miasma plain and saw that Lu Yi was about to make a move. He wanted to use the barren miasma plain to show the country's prestige. In addition, there were people fanning the flames to make Emperor Gong afraid that she and the Crown Prince really had the intention to rebel. So he came up with such a vicious move. It was really interesting. Changshi was silent for a long time and said softly, "Princess, why do you have to do this? If you insist on resisting the imperial edict, perhaps when His Highness returns to the capital, His Majesty will be angry and suspicious. He will really punish His Highness with the sentence, 'The man who built the barren miasma plain.' Is this what you want to see?" At this time, Gong Che's head was pillowed on her lap. It was unknown whether he was alive or dead, but the emperor used his 2 sons' lives to threaten her, an outsider. It was really interesting. Gong Yimo could not help but reach out to touch Gong Che's frighteningly white face. Why should I sacrifice so much for the imperial family? It was like this in the previous life, and it would be the same in this life? Do you really think I can't be ruthless? Wasn't it Gong Dai? Wasn't it Gong Che? What does that have to do with me? So what? But suddenly, Gong Yimo spat out a mouthful of blood. Her actions really gave Changshi a fright. Even the people kneeling around her were shocked. He panicked. Gong Yimo vomited blood. She was actually forced to vomit blood. She raised her bloodshot eyes and looked at Changshi. That look made Changshi involuntarily take a step back. She smiled and casually wiped the blood from her lips with the back of her hand. Isn't it just death? The Emperor doesn't care. But I do? But when she said that, she actually spat out another mouthful of blood. After spitting out 2 mouthfuls of blood, her entire little face turned golden white. But she was still smiling, revealing a mouthful of blood-stained teeth. She thought of Gong Dai, who was far away in the West Continent, whose fate was unknown. That was the child she had raised single-handedly. How could she not care? She then thought of Gong Che. She had done so much for him. Also that he would be a kind and good emperor in the future. She also really treated him as a good brother. How could she not care? So even though she had lived 3 lives, she was still so useless? She would rather die than hand over the Lei. Was she going to watch them die? Gong Yimo opened her mouth and wanted to laugh, but she spat out another mouthful of blood. Princess. Just when Changshi was stunned and did not know how to react, Commander Zhao could not stand it anymore. The moment Gong Yimo fell, he flew onto the carriage and hugged her tightly. He raised his head and glared at Changshi. It was the first time he dared to look at the first person by the Emperor's side with such a gaze. Eunuch Changshi, I can't stand it anymore. How old is the princess? Your approach is really despicable. Over the past year, how many things has the princess done for the people of Dayu State? We have all seen it with our own eyes. Along the way, there are no people who don't like the princess and don't remember her kindness. We admire her very much. Today, if Eunuch really wants to do it, even if I lose my life, I will do it according to the princess's wishes. We will return to the capital by boat. Changshi had already panicked when he saw Gong Yimo vomiting blood. At this time, the 2,000 imperial guards all knelt down. We swear to serve the princess. Eunuch Gong was shocked when he saw this scene. That was the first person by the emperor's side. Are you all crazy? At this time, Imperial Dr. Su and others also sighed and knelt down. We are also willing to return to the capital by boat. We have already stopped believing in her once, so we can't stop believing in her a second time. Since the princess guarantees that the waterway can be passed, then we are all willing to believe in her once. Everyone knelt down. Only Changshi and Eunuch Gong were standing. Eunuch Gong was stared at by Commander Zhao with a murderous look, but he also knelt down with a plop. A girl who was deprived of her identity as a princess and was only 13 years old. What kind of charm does she have that can make so many people submit to her? And they are willing to listen to her orders? Changshi couldn't help but take a look at Gong Yimo. At this time, her small face was pale and she was in a mess. But when he remembered that she often naughtily pulled the horsetail whisk in his hand, he couldn't bear it. For the first time, he disobeyed the emperor's will and agreed. So the group of people went back home. Changshi wrote a letter and ordered people to rush back to the capital, explaining the reason why the crown prince was in danger and must take a boat. On the way back to the Huai River, Commander Zhao rode his horse and guarded the carriage without saying a word. His eyes flashed with a strange light, as if he was thinking about something. Just now, when he had caught the princess, she had written a sentence in his hand, one stroke at a time. Tens of thousands of people pulling silk into the capital. Find Wu Hong. Commander Zhao knew Wu Hong, but that person was very inconspicuous. It was said that he was working for the princess, but he didn't know what he was doing. Tens of thousands of people pulling silk? Do they have such a big boat? And why did the princess do that? At this time, she and the crown prince were already at the cusp of the storm. What's the benefit of returning to the capital in such a high-profile way? On the way back, Commander Zhao told Deputy Commander Zhou Qi about this matter. Zhou Qi was a dark-skinned man. He rubbed his chin and said, "Why don't I go ahead and ask Wu Hong about the situation? That's the only way." Commander Zhao patted his shoulder and sighed. "I only hope that the princess can get through this. I'm counting on you." When he thought of that little girl who was so angry that she vomited blood, Commander Zhao's face was full of unbearable resentment. Although they didn't know the reason, what kind of man was he to force a girl like this? Commander Zhou accepted the order and immediately rushed to the Huai River ahead of the carriage. Changshi glanced at him but didn't stop him. When they reached the Huai River, Commander Zhou didn't dare to delay for a moment and went directly to Wu Heng's residence. It was already dawn, but he hadn't gotten up yet. When he heard that the imperial guards were looking for him, his heart trembled and he quickly got up. What orders does Commander Zhou have? Chapter 97. Wu Heng knew this commander. The princess was also very good to them and had become close friends with him. Therefore, Wu Heng had met this commander several times. The other party did not have time to talk nonsense with him. Wu Heng, I'm here on the princess's orders. The princess said that she wanted thousands of people to tow the ship and asked us to look for you. You have to give us an explanation. Wu Heng was puzzled. Didn't she say that she had to wait until winter? Commander Zhou was even more puzzled. Why wait until winter? Wu Heng looked him up and down before he smiled and said, originally, the princess had prepared a huge ship and wanted to present it to your majesty during your majesty's birthday in winter. He could not help but frown. It was not that he had not heard of the turmoil during this period, but as the ship's steward, he could not interfere. He could only worry helplessly. A huge ship? Zhou Qi repeated. What kind of ship can be called a huge ship? Then, he slapped the back of his head. That ship must be very big. The princess must be talking about this ship. Quick, take me to see it. Wu Heng was a little confused. Where is the princess going with the ship now? As he spoke, he hurriedly put on his clothes. Zhou Qi said in a muffled voice, back to the capital, of course. As he spoke, he looked back at him suspiciously. Since it's a huge ship, how many people can it hold? He calculated in his heart. It would be great if it could hold 300 people. Other than the important people, some of the imperial guards would be able to protect them. The rest would take the small boats. Wu Heng followed him out and asked in a daze, didn't they say that they were leaving the capital? Including the imperial guards, there should only be about 2,000 people, right? What do you mean by 2,000 people? At this moment, Wu Heng snapped out of his daze. He straightened his clothes and raised his head proudly. If there are only 2,000 people, one ship is enough. This sentence caused Zhou Qi to freeze on the spot, unable to regain his senses for a long time. One ship? 2,000 people? Is this Wu Heng lying to me? When Zhou Qi saw the unbelievably huge ship, he was completely stunned. As if possessed, he wanted to touch the shining armor of the ship. However, because of the lake, he could only look and sigh. This is the princess's ship? Zhou Qi quickly denied himself. How is that possible? The princess had only been building the canal for a year and a half. It was impossible for her to build such a boat. Could it be that he can predict the future? Although he had seen it countless times, Wu Heng was the same as Zhou Qi. Every time, he would exclaim from the bottom of his heart, it would be impossible to build such a ship with the current technology, but the princess has proposed a method that not only increases the safety of the ship, but also increases its balance and capacity. But the craftsmanship is only 2/3 of what it used to be. How is this possible? Princess, how did she do it? Watertight compartment. Wu Heng pointed at the hull of the ship and smiled. This ship can hold more than 2,000 people. Because not only can it carry people on board, it also has cabins below the ship. The watertight compartment, if one had to put it simply, was to separate the originally solid cabin section by section. This way, not only would it reduce the weight and increase the buoyancy, it would also greatly increase the safety. For example, if one or two cabins were damaged, the ship would not sink. He explained it to Zhou Qi and Zhou Qi said, amazing. It's amazing. If this method is used in the Navy, no one in Dai State's warships will be able to defeat them. However, the most important thing now was for the princess and the crown prince to survive this disaster. Zhou Qi thought of Gong Yimo's pale face in a coma and couldn't help but sigh. He then told Wu Heng about the current situation. When Wu Heng heard this, he was so angry that he screamed. Preposterous. How preposterous. He wasn't tall, so he jumped on the spot and cursed. Is the princess's contribution not enough? How dare they use His Highness to threaten the princess to hand over something? This is the biggest joke in the world. Zhou Qi sighed. You can't blame His Majesty for this. His Majesty must be very upset that the bronze cauldron was dug out. In addition, there were people fanning the flames, so His Majesty is like this. When eunuch Chang Shi saw that the crown prince was in danger, he was very shocked. It seems that His Majesty doesn't know about this. If he knew, he wouldn't be like this. As for what the princess has, it must be very important. But no matter how important it was, he shouldn't force a child like this. He couldn't explain further. He didn't read the secret report, so he simply thought that the princess vomited blood in anger because His Highness was threatened, and the emperor temporarily took back the crown prince's authority. But things weren't that simple. When Lu Yi came to invade, Gong Chung also wanted to get the thing in Gong Yimo's hands to give Lu Yi a crushing lesson. But Gong Yimo made it clear that she wasn't willing to give it to him. In addition to the bronze cauldron incident and the people around him fanning the flames, Gong Chung was so anxious to get the treasure. He thought that the more Gong Yimo refused to give it to him, the more suspicious it was. It confirmed the guesses of the people around him that she was plotting rebellion. That was why he was so anxious. And all of this led to the current situation. The person behind the scenes must be very proud of himself. He took advantage of the emperor's suspicion. The crown prince worked hard for more than a year for the people, but now he was assassinated to seize power. The princess was also so angry that she vomited blood. The ninth prince's life was unknown, and the Grand Canal was put aside. Who knew who would benefit in the future? How shrewd. What a good plan. With such a brain, why use it to harm people and seize other people's political achievements? The more Wu Heng thought about it, the angrier he became. You said that the princess wants thousands of people to pull the ship? Yes. This was also what Zhou Qi couldn't figure out. His Majesty suspected that the crown prince was disloyal, so why did the princess want to be so high profile? Wu Heng touched his chin. Every scale on this giant ship can be turned over. There are small holes on it, specially designed for pulling the ship. But back then, the princess designed it so that during His Majesty's birthday, tens of thousands of people would pull the ship back to the capital and present it to the emperor. Now that the plan has been brought forward, I don't know why. Zhou Qi also couldn't figure it out. It's probably because the ship is more stable and beneficial for the crown prince's recovery. Wu Heng felt that this reason was definitely not the whole reason, but since he couldn't figure it out, he decided not to think about it. He clapped his hands and said, "Don't worry about it. We can't care about that anymore. You said that eunuch Chong she will be arriving with his men this afternoon. Then, we have to make our move now. Find the people to pull the ship." Zhou Qi looked at the giant ship and sighed. Is it because the ship doesn't have enough power, so you need people to pull the ship? Wu Heng smiled slyly. It's the opposite. This ship is originally very light, and the ship has a very labor-saving propeller design. The two sides of the ship have also been modified. To drive such a ship, only 40 people are enough. But the lack of power can be the reason why we need people to pull the ship. Chapter 98. Although it wasn't the time to be amazed, Zhou Qi still couldn't help but praise the ingenuity of this ship. Looking at the design of the 5 sails that were obviously different from other ships, the armor that could be turned over, and the internal workmanship, it wasn't hard to imagine how much effort the princess had put into this ship. Originally, the princess wanted to have thousands of people pull the cable and give this ship to the emperor for his birthday. Her filial piety moved heaven and earth. Who knew what the emperor's expression would be when he found out? Without further ado, they split into 2 groups. Wu Heng spent money to hire people to motivate people and recruit people. Zhou Qi went to find the local governor. The governor of the Huai River was actually most grateful to Gong Yimo because in her plan, the Huai River would be a transit point between the north and the south in the future. One could imagine how rich the banks of the Huai River would be in the future. So when he heard Zhou Qi's request, he knew it was the princess's idea. He risked offending the emperor and hurriedly ordered people to beat drums and gongs to spread the news. The crown prince is dying, but he was removed from his post and rushed to the capital to receive his punishment. Is there any justice in this world? After receiving the money, coupled with the anger in their hearts and the tacit approval of the local governor, the storytellers spared no effort. The poor princess was angered to the point of vomiting blood by the little people in the capital, but she still cares about the crown prince's body. Now, the princess promised that the waterway would be clear by the time she reached Hengshui, but she was afraid that the ship would be too slow and couldn't make it back in time, so she wanted to hire people to pull the cable. We are people who have received her favor and are willing to help the princess. The princess's virtue can be felt by the sun and the moon. Now that she has been harmed by villains, we commoners also want to seek justice for her. I, Lu Qin, will be the first to participate. I must escort the princess back to the capital safely. We swear to send the princess back to the capital. What they didn't expect was that the students' enthusiasm was even more intense than theirs. They didn't go to school today. Not only did they sign up to pull the cable, but they also went out to help Zhou Qi persuade the people. The princess is a great benefactor to us students. Her heart for the country and the people is not inferior to any husband. We are willing to escort the princess back to the capital. All the students of the Huai River will not be absent. The crown prince and princess have done so many good things, but they didn't get the reward they deserved. Now that the canal has been delayed because of those villains fighting for power, it's clear who's good and who's bad. No matter who builds the canal in the future, this old man will only recognize the crown prince's credit. We will send the princess back to the capital together. Let's clear the crown prince. They don't be disloyal. They are good people. In the morning, the people in the city seem to have gone crazy. Students and commoners paraded through the streets. Even many commoners and women signed up to help this female hero. Soon, more and more people gathered at the entrance of the market. Zhou Qi was stunned. He did not expect the princess to have such charisma. Wu Heng was overjoyed. His shrewd eyes immediately locked onto those students. They were scholars with the highest status. Perhaps when they reached the capital, they could even help the princess. Therefore, he bowed again and again. Looking at the emotional crowd, he spoke sincerely. I didn't expect the people of Huai River to be so righteous. Today, the crown prince and princess have been wronged and must immediately return to the capital. I thank everyone for being able to stand here, but I hope to select people with reputation and ability to go with me. This is only to be able to offer their meager strength when the emperor is angry. I hope everyone will not blame me. When many commoners heard that they might not be able to pull the princess's hair, although they felt regretful, they were not angry. They knew that only people like students, doctors, and teachers had weight in their words. A student said, "From Huai River up, we will pass through many cities. Zishu is not talented, but I am willing to go to the lower city first and persuade other students to go with us." In this way, if there were people persuading students to pull the princess's hair, then when they reached the capital, how many people would there be? When Wu Heng heard this, he was so excited that he bowed deeply. In this case, thank you for your righteousness. Students, please leave immediately. They will be here soon. The leader of the students was a white-haired teacher. He stood there openly because he sincerely believed that the crown prince was a good crown prince and was worthy of him doing this. He said loudly, "Sir, please wait a moment. Let us change our clothes and gather by the river. Pull the princess's hair for the crown prince." There were also commoners who said, "We are also willing to follow the boat and wait for orders." Wu Heng only felt a surge of righteousness in his chest that could not be suppressed. He bowed deeply again, then suddenly raised his head and pointed in a direction. "In 2 hours, I will be at the Huai River Pier to welcome all of you." Therefore, when Changxi and the rest reached the Huai River, they did not have time to be shocked by the huge monster in the river. They were first shocked by the densely packed people on both sides of the river. What was even more strange was that they were all wearing formal student attire. They were wearing sky blue and white long-sleeved, scholarly robes and square student hats. They were waiting there, as if to welcome them. Changxi was stunned, then asked the person standing at the front angrily, "What is going on? Why are there so many people gathered here?" When Wu Heng faced the #1 expert in the imperial palace, he was still a little afraid, but with thousands of students supporting him, he was confident. "Eunuch, please take a look." He pointed at the huge boat not far away. "This boat. It is a huge boat that the princess spent more than a year and exhausted all her efforts to build. Originally, the princess wanted to present this boat to His Majesty on his birthday, but now, since Eunuch is in a hurry to return to the capital, it has become the best means of transportation. After all, it is big and stable, the most suitable for the princess to recuperate. As for these people," Wu Heng smiled and said, They are all grateful for the princess's kindness. When they heard that His Majesty is in a hurry and that the boat is moving slowly, they spontaneously organize themselves and are willing to open the way for the boat. Changxi's mouth twitched, and his face was very ugly. In the end, he pointed at the scholars in front of him and said, "They are weak. How can they open the boat? There are also us." At this time, many migrant workers came from afar. They were all dressed in linen and looked very clean and energetic. "We are also willing to go. Open the way for the huge boat." At this time, the head of the students also bowed and said, "Although we are weak, our hearts are sincere. We hope that you will not stop us and fulfill our sincerity." When he said that, all the students bowed down. How could Changxi say anything? After all, these scholars were of high status. They were far from being suppressed by a eunuch like him. Thinking of the little princess who was still unconscious, Changxi let out a long sigh and acquiesced. Everyone's face lit up with joy. They all got into position. The boat. It was about to start. On both sides of the huge boat, there was a hemp rope dyed blue tied to each scale. There were 500 ropes on each side. They hung down on both sides of the boat and spread out like the wings of the huge boat. Some of the imperial guards stood at the front, with the students in the middle and the farmers at the back. With a command, "Move!" all the ropes were immediately taut. All the scales turned over. Under the sunlight, they shone with a dazzling cold light. It was moving, like a huge beast. It was majestic and domineering as it drove its huge body. On both sides of the boat were the people escorting it, and behind it was the waves of the lake. It was such a clear standard, as if it represented the era. It was slowly moving forward. Chapter 99. Along the way, they passed by Tianqi, Huai, Zhouyi, and finally arrived at Hengshui. Along the way, countless students joined them. They were all wearing sky blue and white scholarly robes and slowly replaced the main troops. Soon, the commoners spontaneously retreated to the back of the line. Later, the imperial guards also retreated to the back of the line. Only tens of thousands of students were left. They devoutly guarded the huge ship as it moved forward. They originally thought that although the princess had promised that the road would be cleared by the time they reached Hengshui, when it really happened, they couldn't help but sigh in admiration. How many people had to work at the same time to dig a canal that would have taken a month to this extent in 7 or 8 days? However, because there was still a lot of construction going on ahead and the road had not been completely cleared, the water level in the river was very shallow. When the huge ship reached here, it slowed down. What made Changxi incredulous was that when they passed by the banks of Hengshui, the construction team in front received the news and moved even faster. When the commoners who were repairing at the back saw the huge ship, they knew that the princess and crown prince had arrived. They all retreated to make way for the students and then respectfully knelt down. "Welcome the crown prince. Welcome the princess. Welcome the crown prince. Welcome the princess." This scene frightened the students. Because the sky was repairing the canal, the local governor had mobilized the entire city to repair the last section of the canal. There were so many people that the sound of kneeling down and shouting was earth-shattering. It was a grand scene that they had never seen before in their lives. Many students' eyes were moist. The rope in their hands also became heavy. They felt that they were not just pulling the cable, but upholding justice. It was because of justice that they received the recognition of so many people. It was even more so than an emperor's parade. As the ship moved forward, it became more and more strenuous. This was because the canal had just been cleared less than a day ago. The local governor had repaired it from the two ends to the middle. The progress of the soaring Dragon River was still a step away. At this time, the water on their side was drawn from the river beside them. Therefore, they were really pulling the cable now. How much strength could those students have? The speed of the ship slowed down. Many commoners who had followed them all the way here rubbed their palms in anticipation. They finally had a use for them. When the farmers on both sides of the river saw this, they came over to help the students pull the cable. They were very strong. Almost as soon as they started, the pressure on the students was greatly reduced. The boat started moving again. Normally, many of the students came from wealthy families and studied sage books. Naturally, they would look down on these bumpkins. But now, when the other party's dark skin came close and the mud on his body stained their sky blue and white uniforms, they did not look down on him in the slightest. Especially when the commoners, whose hands had turned purple from the ropes, were still concerned about the inconspicuous blisters on the hands of the students. Many of the students cried, especially those who were not well off. They could not help but think of their parents. Born from the same root, drink from the same source. There is no difference between high and low. Only with a benevolent heart can there be a pattern. At this moment, they finally understood the meaning behind the words left behind by the ancient saint, as well as the deeper meaning that they would never have understood before. But just when they thought they would have to drag it all the way to the capital, one of them was riding a horse with a flag raised high in his hand. His face was filled with excitement. They ran over cheering. He shouted with a flushed face as he ran, "The water is coming! The water is coming!" The Grand Canal was now open. The Grand Canal is complete. The Grand Canal was completed. As he shouted that the water was coming, many people felt their emotions surge as they shouted as well. The water is coming. The Grand Canal is completed. The Grand Canal is completed. Amidst the cheers of the commoners and everyone's anticipation, a turbid wave with the force of thunder, it surged over. It was like 10,000 horses galloping. It was like a yellow dragon bursting its dike. It was majestic and spectacular, sacred and unchangeable. Water. It was a gift from the heavens. It was revered by all. It could not be defied. It was the most virtuous and the most heartless. But they had succeeded. The construction of the Grand Canal was not only changing the water, but also taming it. At this moment, the tiny humans seemed to be above nature. That was an incomparable sense of accomplishment. It made one feel intoxicated and addicted. As the water dragon rushed over, many students on both sides of the river could not avoid it in time. Their clothes were drenched by the rapid water flow, but they were not angry. Instead, all of them laughed loudly. Everyone on both sides of the river was celebrating. The joyous laughter and cheers could probably be heard in the capital. Someone even pointed at the river and improvised a poem. The angry water drives away the cold air, like thunder dispersing the sound. The waves are high and the wind is strong. The waves are rapid and hard to sink. Then, amidst everyone's exclamations, the huge ship was raised by the water flow again. It was like a trapped beast, struggling in the surging waterway. Everyone was aggressive as they gripped the rope tightly and looked in the direction of the capital. Continue. All the way to the north. Your Majesty, they are back. Someone trembled as he said this and quietly shrank to the side, wishing that he could disappear. He thought that the emperor would be furious, but he did not expect that after waiting for a long time, the emperor was surprisingly quiet. 2 days ago, Gong Cheng received the news that Gong Che and Gong Yimo were returning to the capital on the huge ship. Countless commoners dug day and night for the ship to move. Finally, this morning, the Longtung River in the capital was opened. The huge ship entered the capital directly. There were also countless students pulling the rope for the ship. Everywhere it went, there were countless people who responded. Such popular sentiment, such appeal, rather than saying that it made him afraid, it was more appropriate to say that it made him shocked. Gong Cheng could not help but recall that when he first heard the news, the person who reported it was still carefully adding oil to the fire. But he was stunned, and only one sentence echoed in his mind. His child has really surpassed him. A complicated feeling of pride and fear drowned him. It was as if he was already old and useless, and could be replaced at any time. Now that he heard that they came back with great fanfare, his first reaction was not to be angry, but to want to laugh. This is his child. This must be that little girl's idea. At this time, the palace door opened, and a beauty dressed in palace attire leisurely stepped forward. She held a bowl of medicine in her hand, and slowly walked to the front of the emperor like a willow branch swaying in the wind. Your Majesty, it's time to take the medicine. She tried to lift her fair wrist, but Gong Cheng pushed it away with one hand. Your Majesty, I don't want to eat. That woman's beautiful eyes turned, and she removed her hand. Soon, A palace servant took the bowl of medicine and retreated. She glanced at the emperor and smiled softly. I heard that the crown prince has returned to the capital. Is your majesty worried about how to deal with the crown prince? When she said this, she even coughed a few times. She was really weak. Gong Cheng's eyes flashed with a trace of pity. Long-er, you don't need to worry about this. Your body is not good, so don't worry. Chapter 100. It turned out that she was the imperial concubine Long, who claimed to be ill all year round. If Gong Yimo was here, she would really praise her. What a devastatingly beautiful and delicate beauty. She blinked, her limpid eyes full of worry. Your Majesty need not be too worried. I think those rumors are not true. The crown prince may have really been attacked by an assassin and cannot return to the capital. It's not that he has a rebellious heart and used the excuse of being attacked by an assassin to refuse to return to the capital. Your Majesty, please don't be angry. Her words were slow and very weak, but it made Emperor Cheng's mood turn cold little by little. Emperor Cheng's face was as calm as water, and his face twitched twice. It's best that he doesn't have such thoughts. Only I can give my position. No one can snatch it. With that, he strode out of the hall and prepared to leave the palace. He wanted to personally welcome his son, who had won the hearts of the people after not seeing him for more than a year. Long Xiangxiang looked at the emperor's departing back and covered her mouth to smile. Longtongue River was the moat, and the east gate was the closest gate to the moat. At this time, the emperor stood on the gate with hundreds of officials, looking into the distance. Unlike Emperor Cheng's complicated emotions, the officials also had different expressions. Some were worried and anxious, some were calm and collected, and some were tense as if they were preparing for war. It wasn't until the giant ship slowly approached under the escort of countless people that they couldn't restrain their surprise any longer. They all exclaimed in surprise. It was too big, too big. It was like a palace. No wonder so many people were needed to pull it. They had never seen such a huge ship. Someone seized the opportunity to whisper behind the emperor, "It's just an assassination attempt, but he has to take such a big ship back to the capital. The crown prince is not the emperor yet, but he dares to waste people's money and be so arrogant and extravagant. If he really becomes the emperor, I don't know how many people he will harm for his own desires." When Emperor Cheng heard it, he couldn't help but look back at the person beside the left prime minister. This glance made the person who spoke feel a chill down his spine, and he shut his mouth in embarrassment, not daring to raise his head again. But even if he didn't say it, someone else would. The crown prince's character has never been like this. I've long heard that the crown prince dug out the cauldron of King Wu that had sunk into the Jade Dragon cauldron years ago. There was also a prophecy on the cauldron to save the world. The crown prince must have been flattered by a slanderous official. That's why the crown prince became so ignorant. TSK, a cultivator of the Canal River will bring glory to the world. How arrogant. Their words made Gong Cheng's heart sink deeper and deeper. He thought of Gong Yimo's Yuluin, which was said to be able to shake the heavens and break the earth, and the crown prince dug out the bronze cauldron of prophecy. He gradually became anxious, and his eyes became colder and sharper. Seeing that the boat was getting closer, he waved his hand, and the people in the dark immediately got ready for battle. More than 5,000 Imperial Army soldiers surrounded the eastern city gate. As they watched the approaching ship, they were perplexed. If they really wanted to rebel, why did they have to make such a big fuss? They were getting closer. Countless students gathered at the foot of the city. Feeling the tense atmosphere inside and outside the city, they held their heads high and their backs straight. In the end, they all knelt down. Your Majesty, long live the Emperor. Long live. Long live. The earth-shaking kowtows pulled Gong Cheng back to reality. He looked at the crowd of people kneeling at the foot of the city. His expression was complicated and puzzled. Why were they so obedient and devout to worship him? What kind of trick was Gong Yimo playing? The giant ship gradually stopped. It was only 20 to 30 meters away from the city gate. Many people came down from the ship and kowtowed to the emperor. But the city gate was closed, and there was no sign of it opening. Gong Cheng's pair of tiger-like eyes stared at the ship. there were still people who didn't come down. It was only when most of the people had come down that someone carried Gong Che down. Thankfully, after a few days of treatment, Gong Che had already survived this ordeal. Once he woke up, he would be able to recuperate properly. Gong Cheng glanced at Gong Che. Although he was far away, his pale appearance couldn't deceive people. Moreover, Changshi followed Gong Che all the way. They couldn't disguise themselves. So, Gong Che was really attacked by an assassin and was seriously injured? Gong Cheng's eyes narrowed. Why did his intelligence say that Gong Che was not seriously injured? How many tricks were there in this? He no longer thought about it. His eyes were still staring at the giant ship. There were still people who didn't come down. That ship was really high. The mast was even higher than the city gate. Now that they were so close, people could clearly see how magnificent and exquisite the ship was. Gong Cheng didn't admit that he was jealous. His dragon ship wasn't so magnificent. At this time, Changshi had already sneaked to Gong Cheng's side. There were still people. Gong Yimo hadn't come down yet. As if to cater to his thoughts, a pale figure appeared, but she didn't get off the ship. Instead, she stood on the deck. Because the ship was very high, Gong Cheng could clearly see how weak she was now. Her pale face was bloodless, and her eyes were staring at him coldly. Changshi looked at Gong Yimo like this. His whole body was on guard, ready to protect the emperor at any time. Along the way, he really couldn't figure out what Gong Yimo was selling. Since she woke up 2 days ago, she didn't say a word except for thanking the people once. Hearing Changshi's vigilant and whispered back, Gong Cheng's heart ached. He didn't expect that Gong Che was really dying, and he issued such a decree at such a time. So much so that the child in front of him was forced to vomit blood. He really couldn't imagine that the mentally tough Gong Yimo would vomit blood one day. She dared to kill people in front of the emperor to ask for a reward when she was 10 years old. She dared to use meritorious service in exchange for the lives of the Liu family when he was angry. She dared to send Gong Dai to the West Continent openly and dared to draw a path to heaven for Gong Che in a difficult situation. Would a woman like her also have a time when she was helpless to vomit blood? Gong Yimo stood alone on the deck. The wind tore at her thin but tall body. She held the exquisite carved railing and smiled at the people on the city gate. "Long time no see, your majesty." It was as if they were separated by thousands of mountains and rivers. She was obviously close at hand, but she was far away at the end of the world. Gong Cheng still remembered that she used to sweetly call him Father Emperor, coaxing him to be happy, and then shamelessly asking him to reward her. But now, she stood on the opposite side of him and coldly called him Your Majesty. Gong Cheng felt quite uncomfortable, but his eyes still stared at her majestically. He wanted to see what kind of trick she was going to play. "Bold. Why don't you kneel when you see His Majesty?" Someone beside the emperor reacted and quickly jumped out to accuse her. Gong Yimo was too lazy to look at him. "His Majesty has specially allowed me not to salute in front of anyone. Who do you think you are? Is it your turn to speak?" The official choked. He wanted to say that she was a commoner and he, as a first-rank minister, couldn't speak. But when he caught a glimpse of the emperor's unhappy eyes, his heart trembled and he quickly retreated. "Emoer." Gong Cheng pointed to the students and commoners under the city gate with an unhappy expression. After saluting, these people firmly guarded the two sides of the ship, as if they were afraid that he would explode and hurt people. "You brought these people and drove the ship straight to the imperial city. What do you want?" Chapter 101. He spoke calmly, but his tone was very dangerous, revealing the pressure of an emperor. Gong Yimo raised her head and looked straight at him, saying loudly, "Of course, I'm here to complain to you." Her words made everyone present have different expressions. Emperor Chang was silent for a moment, glancing at the many people below, and said coldly, "Who do you want to complain to?" Gong Yimo smiled slightly, looking tired, but her movements were very graceful as she bowed. "This humble girl has 3 complaints. I hope your majesty can make a decision. Speak." Gong Yimo didn't seem to be the slightest bit afraid of the emperor's aura. She looked at the people on the wall, who were all staring at her like a tiger watching its prey. It was as if the words that came out of her mouth were not words, but blades. The sky was gloomy. Large black clouds gathered, as if it was going to rain. The winter wind was biting cold and tearing. Gong Yimo tidied the hair by her ear, took a deep breath, and said calmly, "First, I'm going to complain to the princes." Her gaze fell on the princes of different ages behind the ministers, but she only glanced at them indifferently, as if she was disdainful. Since the construction of the canal began to be successful, there have been countless people who secretly tried to trip us up, especially the frequent movements of the clans behind the princes. We have been wholeheartedly at the front line, working hard day and night. But there are so many people who not only don't want to leave your majesty's sight to seek favor, but also want to reap without sowing. Their actions are despicable. She didn't point at anyone, but her tone of disgust made many people's hearts tremble. But at this time, the common people were watching, so even if those princes were angry in their hearts, they could not show it. They were afraid that if they opened their mouths at this time, they would be remembered by the students below and be condemned in speech and writing. So they could only glare fiercely at Gong Yimo. When the emperor heard this, he could not help but think of the year and a half when the crown prince was building the canal. The princes secretly squeezed him, and the concubines from time to time, and he could not say anything to refute. If it were not for his strong support, the canal would only be half built now. Thinking of this, Emperor Cheng felt unreasonably disgusted with those people. This humble girl's second complaint. Tell the minister. Without waiting for Gong Cheng to react, Gong Yimo's slender finger pointed at the people on the city wall. Her small face was pale as she sneered. The crown prince was almost killed by an assassination attempt, but when it reached His Highness's ears, it was as if the crown prince had deliberately faked an assassination attempt in order to avoid returning to the capital. As a result, His Majesty issued 3 imperial edicts to force the crown prince to return to the capital. The crown prince almost died on the way back. As a minister, you don't think about how to benefit the people, don't think about how to develop and innovate. Your structure and vision are actually limited to fighting for favor, framing, and eliminating dissidents like the women in the harem. Your actions are like those of the sages. She mocked him coldly, each and every one of her words ringing in his ears. As for the ministers around the emperor, some of them were ashamed, some of them were pale, and some of them were flustered and exasperated. You're simply slandering me. You keep saying that you're defending the crown prince, but you're just trying to get the crown prince off the hook. He had just dug out the copper cauldron with the words the builder of the canal, Long Zay the world, and now he was saying that he had been assassinated and was on the verge of death. Who knows if the crown prince was blown away by the vile people around him, or because of the prophecy of blessing the world. That's why he disobeyed the imperial edicts. A minister fiercely stared at Gong Yimo. You keep saying that the crown prince is in danger, but didn't he come back safe and sound? His meaning was very clear. He was saying that Gong Che was pretending, and Gong Yimo was here just to wash away Gong Che's crime of rebellion. Gong Yimo laughed out loud. Your Majesty, do you also think so? Gong Cheng's lips moved, but in the end, he didn't open his mouth. From Changxi's report, he might have wronged the crown prince, but that giant cauldron was like a thorn that pierced his suspicious heart. The man who built the canal will bless the world. Gong Yimo touched her chin and suddenly laughed. Do you want me to be the empress? These words were simply treasonous. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Without waiting for Changxi to boldly shout, Gong Yimo leisurely turned around on the deck. She looked at herself and said in astonishment, I actually didn't know that I had the talent to be the emperor. Impudent. Gong Cheng's face was livid as he hammered the siege wall. Who gave her the courage to say such words in front of the whole world? He even wanted to directly let Changxi kill Gong Yimo, lest she continue to mislead the public with her lies. But Gong Yimo looked up at the emperor doubtfully. Isn't it so? Your Majesty, don't you know that it was my idea to build the canal? His words made Gong Cheng choke, and Gong Yimo pointed at the minister who spoke just now and sneered. And didn't he say that the man who built the canal will bless the world? Then, as the instigator who proposed and planned this matter, wasn't the prophecy referring to her? Some officials were immediately dissatisfied, and the left prime minister directly jumped out and said, You don't need to mislead the public with your lies to whitewash the crown prince. The crown prince built the canal and won the hearts of the people? These people at the city gate are the evidence. He is the man who built the canal, and also the person who the people support. Then, how could the prophecy not refer to the crown prince? After saying that, he felt that he had misspoken. But before he could add anything to cover it up, Gong Yimo glanced at him and laughed arrogantly. Her laughter contained inner force, and it spread far and wide. It made people inexplicably uneasy. Then you're wrong. After Gong Yimo finished speaking, she suddenly jumped up and onto the pillar between the railings in front of her. The wind tore her long hair, making her look like she was about to fly, but she stood so straight. Her entire body seemed to extend from her spine to endless strength. She stood on the bow of the ship with an indomitable spirit. Many people cried out in alarm, afraid that she would fall, but Gong Yimo looked up to the sky and laughed. Her sleeves fluttered as she raised her arm and shouted, "Look carefully. These people, they're all here because of me. I'm the one who built the canal. I'm the one who won the hearts of the people. In terms of merit, my reputation will spread far and wide. I, Gong Yimo, am here. Who dares to fight for the peak?" Her words were like a clap of thunder, and her momentum was monstrous. It made many people panic, and they felt a sense of admiration and fear. But the response was like a tide. All the students and people heard this and knelt down, bowing their heads and shouting piously, "I swear to serve the princess. I'll die 10,000 deaths. I'll die 10,000 deaths." The earth-shattering words were like an oath, and it made many people on the city wall feel admiration and admiration. Even those who hated her were convinced. But was Gong Yimo crazy? Even if she wanted to exonerate Gong Che, she shouldn't take this kind of capital crime on herself. Seeing Gong Yimo's appeal with his own eyes, Gong Chung felt a deep sense of shock and fear. He really didn't expect that a woman could not only gain the gratitude of the people, but also gain the recognition of so many students. These scholars, they look down on women the most. Why did Gong Yimo have such appeal and charm to make so many students bow down to her? He looked deeply at Gong Yimo, but there was a slight tremor in his voice. What about the third complaint? Gong Yimo's eyes met his in an instant. That obviously young and tender face showed an inharmonious sadness that went deep into the bone marrow. The third complaint: "I'll sue your majesty." Chapter 102. Her last word was so light that it directly dissipated in the wind. She looked deeply at Gong Chung. For some reason, those eyebrows that were extremely similar to concubine Shue's overlapped at this moment, but they reflected a completely different human brilliance. Gong Cheng's heart trembled. Ignoring the voices of opposition around him, he softly asked, "What do you want to sue me for?" Gong Yimo smiled palely and straightened her back. Although she was alone, standing on the deck facing hundreds of people on the city wall, her back seemed to be supported by endless strength. She had to do this. "I want to sue you. Disregarding the relationship between husband and wife. You're not worthy of being a husband. Disregarding the relationship between father and son. You're not worthy of being a father. Disregarding the people of Daybreak. You're not worthy of being a ruler. Disregarding. You and I are father and daughter. These few years, bits and pieces." Gong Cheng's heart suddenly hurt. His hands were tightly clenched on the city wall, and his body was very tense. His eyes stared at the little person without blinking, as if he could see through her. Her previous words and sentences were complaints for others, but the last few words were inexplicably tactful and sorrowful, as if a knife was cutting into his heart. Gong Chung seemed to see the appearance of a little girl crying alone, and this child was only 13. Gong Yimo quickly collected her emotions and laughed softly. "You and the Empress have been husband and wife for more than 20 years. Even if she didn't have any merits, she still worked hard. It's understandable that she made a mistake and entered the temple to cultivate. But her only son was excluded from living in this world, and you didn't take care of him. Are you worthy of the Empress' expectations for you? Why did the Crown Prince go out to build the canal? He also wanted to be by your side. but you forced him to take this step, forced him to make a name for himself. And he finally made some achievements. But because you listened to slanderous words, the Crown Prince's efforts of more than a year went down the drain. Are you worthy of the Crown Prince's admiration for you? Gong Chung admitted her words, but he wholeheartedly served the country and the people. How could he let down the people of Daybreak? So he looked cold and pointed to the people under the city gate. Since I ascended the throne, I've worked hard every day, reduced taxes, recruited talents, and improved the imperial examination. How have I let down the people of Daybreak? He was also very angry that he said such angry words to Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo shook her head. Because you want to start a war. Her words silenced everyone on the city wall, and the commoners began to panic. Was there going to be a war? Why didn't they receive any news at all? Gong Chung stared blankly, knowing that she was finally talking about that thing. But what did he do wrong? Wasn't he doing this for the sake of the people of Dayu State? Haha, what do you mean I want to go to war? I'm doing this because I want to protect the country without any effort. What's the difference? After he finished speaking, he finally pointed at Gong Yimo with some resentment. You, on the other hand, have a weapon that can intimidate the world, yet you refuse to hand it over. What are your intentions? The emperor's words confused the people. The princess had a weapon that could intimidate the world? Some of the smarter ones couldn't help but think of the miracle of the princess breaking mountains and filling rivers, and started to ponder. Seeing this, Gong Yimo was not anxious at all. She smiled and asked softly, I wonder how the person who betrayed me described that thing to you. She admitted that she really had a very powerful weapon in her hands. Gong Chung snorted coldly, the power to break mountains and rivers, and make the sun and moon lose their color. Ha 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 ha. Gong Yimo laughed out loud. After laughing, she suddenly raised her eyebrows. Since that's the case, I'll let everyone see what the so-called power to break mountains and rivers and make the sun and moon lose color is. With that, she flipped her hand and suddenly took out something that looked like a firework tube. Everyone's eyes immediately converged on it. They watched as Gong Yimo calmly lit it up and then threw it directly into the water in front of her. The process was so simple that it could be said that anyone could do it. But all they heard was a loud bang. The ship flipped backward, and the water in front of the ship suddenly exploded. A water column that was dozens of feet high exploded. The sudden water splashed on the faces of the people on the city wall. Chang Shi hurriedly stood in front of Gong Chung, fearing that it was Gong Yimo's sneak attack. When the deafening explosion was over, the water in the river was crazily tumbling and turbid. The ship violently swayed backward before coming to a stop. Faint smoke filled the air, making the already gloomy sky even gloomier. Many people on the city wall heard a buzzing sound in their ears, but they excitedly looked at Gong Yimo. This was the item that even the emperor wanted. All the people were dumbstruck. It was just a small thing, but it had such power. The water column that suddenly rose. The impact that made the ship flip. This was still in the water. If it was on land, who knows what kind of destructive power it would have. This kind of power. Is it actually achievable by human strength? Many princes couldn't help but stare at Gong Yimo, as if they want to strip her naked, dig out all her secrets. Such a powerful thing. Not only the emperor wants it, they also want it. Gong Cheng's mood fluctuated even more. He pushed Chang Shi away and leaned against the city wall. Looking at the still tumbling river, his heart kept thinking, if we have this thing, when Lu Yi invades, we can easily win. Perhaps we can even become famous in one battle, and completely establish Dayu State's identity as the overlord of the Central Plains. The blood of ambition kept pounding against his chest. No, no, no. Perhaps he could still pursue the victory. Perhaps he could still unify the Central Plains in his lifetime. Gong Chung wanted to speak, but found that his throat was dry and hoarse. Lika didn't lie to him. This was really something that all emperors wanted. Gong Yimo acted as if nothing had happened. When the ship gradually stopped, she patted the non-existent dust on her hands and smiled faintly. Do you think it's very powerful? Her cold tone was like a basin of water splashed, magically calming Gong Chung down. He really wanted it, and it wasn't just him. Presumably, No man would be able to resist its charm. Gong Che seemed to be able to feel countless suppressed and scorching breaths behind him. But, look at them. Gong Yimo pointed at the commoners under the city gate. Gong Yimo didn't remind them just now, so they were closer and felt the destructive power more directly. Their faces were pale, their legs trembled, and they couldn't recover for a long time. Those in power only saw the benefits brought by absolute power, while the commoners were more rational. Only they could see the disaster, slaughter, and destruction brought by this power. The harm was far more than the benefits. Gong Yimo sighed, and her expression was cold and desolate. She looked at Gong Chung, who was looking at the commoners. His mouth was slightly open, and his face was cold, but he couldn't say a word. Chapter 103. This thing, to make it, it's not difficult, but it's not easy either. But if it's mass-produced, I dare say that under the threat of death, it's only a matter of time before others want to imitate it. The officials didn't have any reaction to her words, but the commoners' faces turned even paler. They couldn't imagine what would happen if this thing fell on them, in the fields, in the academy. Gong Yimo looked straight ahead and sighed. But this thing is also very good. If I use it to dig a canal, it can shorten the time of 6 to 7 years by more than half. So much so that I'm standing here on a boat. Not only that, it can be used to build roads, open mountains, and mine. There are countless uses, but it can also be used to kill people. She smiled bitterly and looked at the emperor, who was silent for a long time. So, Your Majesty, you can be afraid or angry, whatever. This thing, when the moral standards of the people are not up to standard, I won't hand it over. Don't you think about how many children you have and how many concubines you have? You may be able to suppress them when you're here, but what about when you're not? Will their ambitions be smaller than yours? One evil thought is enough to split this fertile land into pieces. After that, she bowed deeply in the direction of the commoners. Previously, I lied to everyone, saying that I had the ability to cut mountains and rivers, and in order to continue digging, I lied to everyone that the canal was built by heaven. I admit it. Now that Lu Yi is invading and the war is imminent, I'm not willing to hand over this thing. Everyone should blame me, but I, Gong Yimo, swear here. If our Dayu state doesn't have it, other countries won't have it either. This oath can be witnessed by heaven and earth. If I violate this oath, I will die a horrible death and be abandoned by both God and man. Saying this, she lifted her clothes and knelt down, bowing her head in deep repentance. I beg for heaven's forgiveness. I, Gong Yimo, am guilty. I have a weapon in my hand, but I'm not willing to contribute to the war. I, Gong Yimo, am guilty. I've caused the crown prince to fall into such a situation, his life and death unknown. I, Gong Yimo, am guilty. Because of me, ninth brother can't be helped. Her voice became louder and louder, as if she was reading her own sin to heaven. It also seemed like she was dissatisfied and rebelling. Every word and sentence was filled with tears of blood, but her expression was cold and stern, as if the deep mockery in her words didn't exist. Finally, she smiled weakly and looked at the emperor. And Your Majesty, I, Gong Yimo, am guilty, but I am willing to accept any punishment and am prepared to face it all. And you? Are you sure you can defend it? Have you ever thought about the consequences of taking what belongs to me? The ambition to unify the Central Plains and the battles for the imperial power might put countless people in danger because of one wrong decision of yours. Did you really consider these consequences when your ambitions were inflated? Are your actions really worthy of the people of Dawn? Gong Cheng's face was deathly pale. He couldn't get off the stage. He looked at the people below. At this time, they had forgotten their fear and were looking straight at him. It was as if his will would decide their life and death. But he couldn't refuse. Before he had seen the power of the United States, he could still comfort himself that others were exaggerating. But now that he had seen it, it didn't matter if he couldn't get it. But what if someone from another country got it? He had to think about it. What oath? What responsibility? He couldn't do it. But Gong Yimo, a woman, could do it? Unless she was dead. Gong Yimo slowly stood up. Looking at Gong Qing's murderous eyes, she felt pain in her heart. Her eyes couldn't help but shed tears. Father Emperor, do you still remember that I am your daughter? I was once your most beloved daughter. In order to win your smile, how many things have I done? Do you still remember everything in the past? Her voice wasn't loud, but it was heart-wrenching. Many people were moved. She was like an ordinary girl seeking her father's love. She complained with grievance and sorrow. Her young face was full of tears. They didn't understand why the princess was so good. Why did the princess wholeheartedly serve the people with good intentions? Why did she stand on the opposite side of the emperor and bear the coercion of the imperial power alone? This was wrong. The princess wasn't wrong. Gong Qing's heart ached. He turned his eyes away, not daring to look at her. She wasn't his biological daughter, but Gong Qing couldn't deny that the affection he had for this daughter was much more than all of his biological daughters put together. But why didn't she believe him? Speaking of the word believe, Gong Qing smiled bitterly. Yes, he also couldn't believe that Gong Yimo would keep this weapon for a lifetime. Wasn't Gong Yimo the same? She also didn't believe in him. She was afraid of causing chaos in the world. Both of them were thinking from the perspective of the world, but they could only oppose each other. Both of them knew that this was a dead knot that could not be untied. Gong Yimo finally wiped her tears. At this time, her sad and gloomy appearance made many neutral ministers unable to bear it. They couldn't help but think, there were so many husbands in the world, but how many could be compared to this child in front of them? Gong Qing slowly opened his mouth after a long time. Your 3 requests, Zhan, received. Gong Yimo looked sad. She bowed and bowed to the ground. But I still have 3 wishes. I need your majesty's permission. Gong Qing slightly choked. Speak. First wish. These common people under the city were all deceived by me. They escorted me here. They are innocent. I hope your majesty will not pursue this matter and allow them to enter the city. Many scholars who heard Gong Yimo's name immediately thought of them. Some of them even shed tears, and some of them even shouted out, Princess is benevolent and righteous. We are willing to follow you. We pledge our lives to follow you. Gong Yimo smiled with relief, but didn't look at them. Gong Qing nodded, indicating that he agreed. With his nod, even if some ministers were afraid that Gong Yimo would kill their way in, the city gate was opened. The common people who were tired from the journey could finally enter the city to rest. But they were silent. No one expressed happiness, and no one wanted to resist Gong Yimo at this time. Seeing that the common people could enter the city, Gong Yimo breathed a sigh of relief and smiled slightly. Second wish. Now that the Crown Prince's life and death are unknown, I hope that Imperial Father can release the Empress to take care of him. Moreover, I hope that Imperial Father can recognize the Crown Prince's contribution and return the honor he deserves to him. Thinking of the child he used to threaten Gong Yimo, Gong Qing felt ashamed. As a father, he could be ruthless, but as a sister, Gong Yimo could do so much for him. Gong Che may be unfortunate, but because of Gong Yimo, how lucky was he? So he nodded and agreed to the second request. Gong Yimo smiled. Her pale little face was bloodless. Just a few days ago, she spat out the blood in her heart, but now she is still holding on for the safety of others. The third thing, Gong Ju is innocent. He has been alone since childhood, and I have been the only one who has taken care of him. In the future, I hope that Father Emperor can take over this responsibility and not let him be alone again. Gong Qing nodded heavily, but after he nodded, he immediately felt that something was wrong. Chapter 104. No, he had long sensed it. Gong Yimo is such a smart person. How can she not understand what he is worried about? After saying the 3 wishes, Gong Yimo finally looks up to the sky and smiles. Her smile is so clean and relaxed, as if a heavy burden has been lifted from her heart. Her whole person is light and flying. Suddenly, an explosion sounds from inside the ship. Amidst everyone's exclamation, Gong Yimo does not seem to hear the noise. Her finger slowly traces the carvings on the railing in front of her. After a long time, she suddenly looks up and smiles slyly at Emperor Gong. Father, do you know? This ship, was originally meant to be your birthday gift. But I don't want to give it to you now. Emperor Gong seems to suddenly wake up, but it's too late for regrets. The entire ship explodes one after another and collapses inch by inch. Where the fire appears, the flood floods the sky. No one knows how many bombs are installed, but the explosion sounds are incessant. In the end, the entire ship is covered in fire and is burning fiercely. The fire soars into the sky, almost illuminating the entire sky. After the last earth-shattering explosion, the entire ship suddenly flips over and gradually sinks. No, no. Inside the city are the frightened voices of the people, but outside the city is hell on earth. Everywhere is flying sand and rolling stones, fire and smoke. Both sides of the river are affected, and there are big and small holes in the ground. It really confirms Lika's words. The power to break mountains and rivers, make the sun and moon lose their color. Emperor Gong's eyes are about to burst. His whole body is trembling. No, no, no. Just now, he did not want Gong Yimo to die. He just does not trust her. He has not thought of what to do, but he will definitely not force her to die for that thing. He did not. Changshi, quickly go and save her. Quickly go and save my daughter. In a panic, he forgot to address him as emperor. Changshi quickly kneels on the ground and laments, "Your Majesty, restrain your grief. With such power, the princess must have." Bastard! Emperor Gong suddenly grabs his collar and lifts him up. Who did you say died? Who did you say died? I'll let you go. Scram! Frightened by such a violent emperor, Changshi did not have time to mourn. He hurriedly went down the city, ordered people to open the city gates, and rushed into the flames to search. When the city gates opened, the panicked commoners rushed out to take a look, only to see that only half of the exquisite ship was left. Broken wood and flames were everywhere, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. The entire sky had turned gray, and that proud and upright figure could no longer be seen between heaven and earth. It was unknown who shouted this. The princess committed suicide. This sound was like a chain reaction, and cries could be heard from both inside and outside the city. A dignified man actually shed tears of grief over a woman's suicide. The entire city was in mourning, and the cries of mourning shook the heavens. No wonder the princess wanted them to go to the capital. It turned out that the princess already had the will to die at that time. The cries seemed to be contagious. Many people in the capital heard that Gong Yimo had died, and there were so many people crying for her. For some reason, they also felt sad. They could not help but recall how good the princess was. She was so young, but she had done so many things. Now, she was even forced to commit suicide. A feeling of sympathy for the death of a rabbit pervaded the capital. For a whole 7 days, the capital was in a state of depression. There were students who jointly wrote a eulogy for the princess, and there were also people who insisted that the princess was not dead. They searched day and night in Longting River for her body. That kind of power was enough to destroy a world-shocking ship. They were afraid that even the body of that little person would not be left behind. After the emperor returned to the palace, he did not regain his senses for 3 days. When he regained his senses, he issued 3 imperial edicts. The first was to restore the empress's power as the head of the palace. When the empress came out of the sacred Buddha temple, she did not know what had happened. The second was to send elites to help Junshi of Gojoseon find Gong Dai. Actually, he was not as cruel as he said. After all, he had silently allowed Junshi of Gojoseon to use most of his troops to find Gong Dai. The last imperial edict was the one that really caused a huge uproar. He did not give any reward to Gong Che. There was only one sentence in the imperial edict. The position of the crown prince is well deserved. This was recognition of Gong Che's position as the crown prince. Then, did the others still have a chance? Long Xiangxiang almost ground her teeth to pieces. That little bitch. That little bitch. So what if she's dead? She still has so many things to do. Who is Gong Che to her? Is he worth her doing this? Really? I'm so angry. I should have poisoned her in the cold palace back then. No matter how she thought about it, She could not accept it. Her beautiful face became distorted. For that cauldron, to deceive the emperor, how much effort did they put in? How much money and resources did they spend? Originally, they thought that after the crown prince returned to the capital, they would add fuel to the fire and execute him for the crime of treason. Then, she would let her son take charge of the remaining canal project. It would be effortless for her to obtain unparalleled merit. Moreover, they could also force Gong Yimo to hand over the mysterious weapon. Even if they could not get it, they could use the emperor to get rid of her. But all of this was ruined by Gong Yimo's suicide. They had sacrificed so much, but they did not get anything. Instead, because of Gong Yimo's death, Gong Che's position as the crown prince was established. How could they not be angry? They were about to explode from anger. At this time, a young man smiled coldly and comforted her in a low voice. "Mother, don't be angry. At least we got rid of Gong Yimo, didn't we? Without her, wouldn't it be easy to deal with Gong Che? My benevolent and righteous crown prince brother is not as cunning as Gong Yimo." Her son's words finally made imperial concubine Long feel a little better, but she was still depressed. However, looking at her son in front of her, she was still gratified. "Forget it, you're right. Now, since the crown prince is injured, you have to seize the opportunity to take over the canal project." The man smiled gloomily. His feminine eyes were stunningly beautiful. "Understood, Mother." The Empress had lived in the sacred Buddha temple for more than a year. During this time, it could be said that all of her sharp edges had been smoothed out. After coming out, she was at a loss. But when she saw her seriously injured son, her eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. Her heart ached, but her fighting spirit was ignited again. She took care of Gong Che day and night without letting anyone else do anything. Finally, after 7 days, Gong Che woke up. He was very weak, but the imperial physician said that as long as Gong Che woke up, there would be no problem. In a daze, Gong Che actually felt at ease. He could feel that Gong Yimo was always watching over him. But suddenly, one day, that feeling disappeared. He wanted to open his eyes but couldn't. Now that he woke up, no matter where he was, he first went to find Gong Yimo. But the first thing he saw was his mother. "Mother? Empress?" He didn't speak for a long time. His voice was hoarse and weak, but Empress Lu heard it immediately. She woke up and saw that her son was awake. She immediately cried tears of joy. "Che, you're finally awake. Someone come. Imperial physician. Quickly call the imperial physician." After a while, Gong Che finally sat up after washing up. However, he was still very weak. The Empress fed him some medicine while telling him what happened after he fainted. Chapter 105. Actually, the Empress herself wasn't very clear. She had only heard it from the Lu family after they had taken her out. But she was very clear that there were some things that she definitely couldn't let her son know at this time. Otherwise, with his current body, he wouldn't be able to take it. She first said some good things. For example, the matter of him being framed had been cleared. The emperor pitied his heavy injuries, so she was also released from the sacred Buddha temple. Also, the main branch of the Grand Canal had been opened and so on. But even if she picked out some unimportant things to say, it was still very dangerous. When Gong Che heard that he was escorted by Gong Yimo all the way from the Huai River to the capital, he couldn't help but ask joyfully, "Imperial Mother, where's Imo? Why isn't she here? Was she too tired?" But didn't they say that they had already been back for 7 days? The Empress didn't know what to say. After all, this matter was so big that it couldn't be hidden. But she didn't dare to say it. She mumbled a few words and said that Gong Yimo had left the palace. Then, she excused herself and left with an excuse. Another person came to serve him. This person was one of the Empress's older confidants. She was called Shui Xian. She walked in quietly with her head lowered. She didn't dare to look at Gong Che's eyes and only dared to lower her head to feed him medicine. At this time, Gong Che suddenly smiled. He was born handsome and gentle. His smile actually stunned the people who looked at him. "Aunt Shui Xian, Imperial Mother said that the princess is with Imperial Father. Why didn't she come to see me?" When he said this, Shui Xian was stunned. She didn't even know that the soup in her spoon spilled out. There were some fine wrinkles on her face. Usually, they weren't obvious, but when she frowned, they were all exposed. Gong Che didn't seem to see her abnormal expression and smiled again. I feel very energetic now. Aunt Shui Xian, can you call her over for me? He really wanted to see her. But once he finished speaking, Shui Xian hurriedly hugged the soup bowl and knelt down. Her entire body was trembling because she really didn't know what the Empress had said to the Crown Prince. She could only keep quiet, afraid that she would say something wrong. Her actions made Gong Che's heart sink. He seemed to have a premonition, but he didn't dare to think too much about it. His face paled as he forced a smile and said, "What is Aunt Narcissus doing? Where's Immerse?" He said the last few words very softly, his voice trembling slightly. Meanwhile, Water Deity's entire body was stretched taut as a thin layer of sweat seeped out of her forehead. She knelt there helplessly, not knowing what to say. If she were to tell the truth, she was afraid that Gong Che's body would not be able to take it if he found out. If that happened, she would not be able to absolve herself from the blame even if she were to die 10,000 times. "Aunt, what are you doing?" Gong Che could no longer maintain his smile as he enunciated each and every word. "Where's Immerse?" After a while, Water Deity said in a low voice, "This servant doesn't know." Gong Che seemed to heave a sigh of relief and smiled. "Aunt, quickly get up. Look at you. I didn't ask you where Immerse is. Those who don't know are not guilty. Why are you so nervous?" Water Deity was about to cry. At this moment, the very worried Empress still came back. She couldn't help but sigh when she saw this and waved her hand to dismiss Water Deity. Water Deity hurriedly retreated as if she had been pardoned. Gong Che looked deeply at his Empress mother, as if he wanted to see through all of her dodging and helplessness. "Empress mother, what's wrong with Aunt Narcissus? I only asked her to pass on a message. Why is she so scared?" Empress Lu looked sorrowful when she heard this. She sat at Gong Che's bedside and thought for a while. Her mouth moved a few times as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she only sighed. "Son, if Empress Mother tells you everything, you must promise Empress Mother that you must be well." Her words were like a warning bell to Gong Che. Gong Che forced a smile. "Empress Mother, what are you talking about? I don't understand." Empress Lu's expression suddenly turned serious as she stared at him. "Che, Gong Yimo, she's already dead." As if he was hallucinating, Gong Che felt his ears were buzzing. What was Empress Mother saying? He must have heard wrongly. How could something happen to Immerse? "Empress Mother, what did you say?" Empress Lu saw Gong Che's face suddenly turn pale. She gritted her teeth and finally steeled her heart. Just as she was about to speak, Gong Che suddenly interrupted her. "Empress Mother." His lips trembled as he looked earnestly at the Empress. It was as if as long as the Empress didn't say those words, it would be as if nothing had happened. How could it be? How could something happen to Gong Yimo? She was Gong Yimo. The Empress couldn't help but cry. She was also very grateful to Gong Yimo for all that she had done for Che, but it was too late to say anything now. She was already dead. Therefore, she resolutely told him everything that had happened, including Li Ke's betrayal, Gong Yimo being threatened by the Emperor for him, and being forced to spit out blood, including how she had spent so much effort to open up the Grand Canal so that he could safely return to the capital, including how she had argued with the Emperor to clear his name, including how she had refused to hand over the weapon in her hand, and her last 3 requests and finally dying. She spoke so slowly and so clearly. She hoped that Gong Che would recognize reality. It was better to end the pain quickly than to prolong the pain. But Gong Che, he only felt as if his entire body was empty, as if when the Empress said she was dead, his entire body also died. When he came back to his senses, he felt as if he had been shattered into 1,000 pieces, 10,000 pieces. Every time it shattered, it was a heart-wrenching pain. Gong Yimo, the woman he loved the most. How could she die? How could she die? The suffocating feeling appeared again. The Empress was shocked. She quickly gave Gong Che the medicine that he had been taking for a long time. She loudly shouted for her trusted imperial physician to come. Gong Che, he seemed to be having a relapse. Gong Che didn't know how much medicine he had taken, but it didn't work. He clutched his chest tightly and gasped as if he couldn't breathe. When the imperial physician came, Gong Che only said that his chest hurt so much that he couldn't breathe. But after the imperial physician examined him, Gong Che didn't have a relapse at all. So he didn't feel physical pain, but psychological pain. The imperial physician shook his head, and the empress was even more regretful. She hugged Gong Che and cried, "Don't worry, Che. Nothing can happen to you. What should I do if something happens to you?" But Gong Che couldn't hear anything. He was trembling all over and curled up on the bed. He couldn't feel the empress's heart-wrenching cries, nor could he hear the sounds of people falling off their horses in Phoenix Perch Palace. He only felt as if his heart was being tightly grasped by a pair of hands, tightly clenched. He couldn't breathe. He was about to die. But why did he feel so terrible before he died? His mind was filled with images of her, but she wasn't by his side. Why? Gong Che regretted. He regretted that he didn't express his feelings. He regretted that his beloved was dead. She still didn't know his feelings. He didn't want to be her brother. He wasn't her brother. He wanted to be her man. Even if she hated him, he should tell her about his feelings. "Ah, Gong Yimo, where are you? Where are you?" Chapter 106. As if she was woken up by someone, Gong Yimo opened her eyes and found herself in a very beautiful room. It was also very warm, but she didn't know how long she had slept. "You're awake." A surprised voice sounded and Gong Yimo turned her head to look. It was actually someone she knew. "Shun. Shiyi." She opened her mouth and wanted to smile, but her whole body was sore and she frowned. Shun Shiyi let out a long sigh of relief. His beautiful eyes were dim because he hadn't rested for a long time, but at this time, they were bright again. "Thank the heavens. This young master was really afraid that you would die just like that." It was easy to say, but at that time, it was unknown who led 1,000 people to search for her in Longting River. Finally, the heavens didn't disappoint those who were willing. He beat everyone else and found her in a remote river. At that time, she was lying in a huge dragon head carved out of wood. The dragon head had already cracked and she was lying in it. Her whole body was soaked and she was so weak that it made one's heart ache. Gong Yimo sat up and patted her head. At the last moment of the explosion, she took out the dragon head that was originally going to be installed on the bow of the ship and hid in it. Thank the heavens, there was a gap in the middle of the dragon head that was used for installation. It was just enough for her to hide. Because of the violent vibration and collision, she fainted and the wooden dragon head went all the way down with the flow of water, avoiding the sight of many people. Gong Yimo felt for a moment. Because of the collision, she suffered internal injuries. The external injuries were nothing. This kind of state made her sigh in relief. After a while, she suddenly raised her head and asked anxiously, "How long have I been unconscious?" Shen Shiyi yawned. 7 days. And he also stayed by her side for 7 days. Damn, it's over. Gong Yimo quickly got up. As she put on her clothes, she grimaced in pain because of her internal injuries. Shen Shiyi glared. "What are you doing? Do you know how much effort this young master spent to save you? Where are you going?" Gong Yimo treated him as a friend, so naturally, she didn't hide it from him. Gong Dai is now in deep danger. Although the emperor might have already sent people to look for him, I'm still worried. I'm going to find him myself. Hearing that Gong Yimo was worried about someone else as soon as she woke up, Shen Shiyi became angry and frowned. "Don't go." His voice was very loud. Seeing Gong Yimo stop and look at him in confusion, Shen Shiyi frowned. "Do you know how serious your injuries are? You're going to save people like this? You're clearly going to die." If it were any other matter, there would still be room for discussion, but this matter was absolutely out of the question. Gong Yimo was silent for a moment before she raised her head and looked at him sternly. She said word by word, "That's my family. I have to go." The word family left Shen Shiyi speechless. He was so angry that his jade face turned red. He knew that he couldn't stop Gong Yimo, so after a long time, he couldn't help but mutter in frustration, "Can't you take a breather? He's already so old. What problems can there be? Gong Yimo smiled when she heard this. Gong Dai was raised by me, so I naturally know what he's capable of. Even if he's in danger, he'll be fine. Then why are you still going? Because I'm worried about him. After Gong Yimo finished speaking, she had already put on her clothes. She bowed deeply to Shen Shiyi and said gratefully, "Many thanks to Heir Apparent for saving me. I can't express my gratitude with words. Allow me to repay you when I return." Shen Shiyi snorted in annoyance and didn't even bother to look at her. "Who wants you to repay me?" Although he said that, he still felt a little depressed and disappointed. Gong Yimo rubbed her nose and said embarrassedly, "That, I still have a request." Shen Shiyi rolled his eyes at the sky. "Just say it. You're not the kind of person to be shy." Gong Yimo laughed mischievously. "If there's a chance, help me tell the crown prince that I'm safe." Shen Shiyi was silent for a moment. Then he looked at her with a complicated expression and suddenly said, "Don't tell me you don't have yourself in your heart?" Shen Shiyi saw that she was looking at him with a blank expression and suddenly became angry. "If it's not Gong Dai, then it's Gong Che, or it's some commoner. Common people of the world, you're a woman. Don't tell me you don't have yourself in your heart. You have to know that you just walked through the gates of hell. How can you act as if nothing happened and go save people?" Shen Shiyi angrily closed his mouth. No matter what Gong Yimo thought, he just couldn't let go of the anger in his heart. He was angry for her, complaining about her injustice, and worried for her, but she didn't seem to mind at all. She acted as if nothing had happened. It made him seem like he was meddling in other people's business. Gong Yimo looked at Shen Shiyi's red face and suddenly laughed. This awkward heir apparent was worried about her, right? "You care about me," she said proudly, but Shen Shiyi's handsome face turned red when he heard this. He glared at her fiercely with his bright eyes. "You're thinking too much. I don't care about you." Gong Yimo shrugged. If he didn't care, then he didn't care. In any case, she didn't really care about these things. But seeing her in different appearance, Shen Shiyi became even angrier. He turned his head and didn't want to pay attention to her. "That's right. Are you already the Imperial Left Guard?" "That's right. If it wasn't so, how could he be the first one to find her?" Shen Shiyi was still angry at first, but when he heard her question, he felt a little embarrassed. He looked away and responded with a grumpy voice. "So what if I am?" Gong Yimo smiled and walked forward. Her sudden approach made Shen Shiyi nervous for some reason. He saw her take out something from her chest and stuff it into Shen Shiyi's hand. "Since it's like this, I can't go back on my word on the gift." After forcing it into his hand, she took a step back and bowed again. "In short, we'll meet again when I return to the capital. Don't forget the matter that I asked you to do." After she finished speaking, she made a playful face and turned around to run away. She was like this. She seemed to be easy to talk to, but in fact, once she decided on something, she would never change her mind. Shen Shiyi wanted to call her, but he didn't know what reason to make her stay. He could only sulk and scold this little ingrate. His eyes couldn't help but look at the gift that the other party prepared for him. With one look, he was angry and happy. Gong Yimo actually carved a cute version of Shen Shiyi. That angry face, the bulging cross-shaped mark on the corner of his forehead, and his big eyes seemed to be glaring at someone. It was very funny. Shen Shiyi couldn't wait to throw this thing away. It was really too embarrassing. But when he thought about how Gong Yimo had personally carved him, he couldn't bear to part with it. Did Gong Yimo know the meaning of carving a male figurine and then giving it to someone else? So in Gong Yimo's eyes, a dignified and handsome heir like him actually had this kind of image. But no matter what he thought, Gong Yimo had already walked far away. Chapter 107. A fast horse headed west. Thinking of the child she had raised, Gong Yimo's eyes flashed with a hint of determination. "Wait for me." The barren miasma plains was a very strange place. There weren't many trees here. Even if there were animals, they were extremely ferocious. Ferocious beasts appeared in packs. The ground was covered in withered yellow grass, and there were no other colors. Occasionally, there would be different plants that might be highly poisonous. The sky was misty, and it was almost impossible to see the sun. During the day, the fog was white, but at night, the fog would be mixed with a touch of faint green. Other than when it was snowing or raining, staying here for a long time would cause people to faint, be exhausted, and hallucinate. Therefore, even eagles would take a detour to avoid this place. Gong Dai carefully searched the corpses. For the past 10 days, the direction of Luyi had been blocked by the army, and from time to time, men of sacrifice would be sent in to search. In the direction of Daiyu State, there was an insurmountable snowy mountain. If he wanted to leave, he could only break through Lu Ye's encirclement. Gong Dai had used this period of time to familiarize himself with the barren miasma plains to kill these people. He hadn't eaten for 2 or 3 days. Finally, he found half a bag of wine and a piece of dry food on one of the people's wastes. It seemed like these people were like him. They hadn't eaten for a long time. Gong Dai swallowed slowly, taking small bites very carefully. His experience in the cold palace when he was young told him that eating like this could increase the feeling of fullness, and he wouldn't have abdominal pain if he ate too quickly. He had been wandering around the edge of the plains for a long time. Because of Lu Ye's army, there was almost no way to break through. They were also anxious and wouldn't stop until they caught him. However, Gong Dai knew that they didn't have much food left, especially now that it had snowed once or twice. The animals had all disappeared. At most, in a few more days, the 200,000 soldiers would either take the risk to go to the border cities of Daiyu State or retreat. Now that his grandfather had taken precautions, it was meaningless for them to attack again. Therefore, in at most 10 days, they would retreat. Perhaps they were already retreating by now. However, these 10 days were not easy for him. There was almost no food or water here. Even if they dug holes for water, they wouldn't be able to accumulate much water every day, let alone food. Even the grassroots had no nutrients at this time, and the only animals found here were packs of wild wolves. It was impossible to catch them. How was he going to spend the next 10 days? His cold eyes couldn't help but look at the dozen or so corpses on the ground, revealing a thoughtful expression. The crown prince was critically ill, and the emperor had bestowed countless precious medicines to him, but they were all useless. He vomited almost everything he ate, and medicine was useless. Gong Che clearly knew that he shouldn't be like this. It wasn't his husband's doing, but he couldn't control his body. He couldn't digest the food he ate, and in just a few days, he became shockingly thin. When Shun Shiyi asked to see the crown prince, Empress Lu completely disregarded her manners. Like a trapped beast, she refused to let anyone near her. Shun Shiyi had no choice but to say that he had a way to save the crown prince. Only then was he able to enter the Eastern Palace, dismiss everyone, and meet Gong Che alone. At this time, his face was even paler than when he first returned to the capital. His entire body was frighteningly thin. He lay on the bed, motionless, as if he was already dead. Shun Shiyi snorted, and his slightly arrogant voice echoed in the empty room. "Who are you doing this for?" Gong Che didn't move at all, as if he didn't hear. Shun Shiyi snorted disdainfully. If Gong Yimo saw that the crown prince she worked so hard to save was such a useless person, I don't know how angry she would be. Gong Che's eyes seemed to move, but he still didn't have any consciousness. Shun Shiyi simply sat on the bed and sneered. "Speaking of which, you being able to sit on the crown prince's seat now is because of her painstaking efforts. But with your virtue, I really feel that her sacrifice wasn't worth it." He had already said this, but Gong Che still didn't move at all. Shun Shiyi was a little annoyed. He stood up and prepared to leave. He really didn't want to tell Gong Che that Gong Yimo was still alive. It might be a little cruel, but wasn't it just the death of his younger sister? Why did he have to make it seem like she was dying for love? He took a few steps, but there was still no movement behind him. He couldn't help but grit his teeth. When he thought about how if Gong Che really died like this, he didn't know how Gong Yimo would blame him when she returned. So even if he was unwilling, he still whispered a sentence. "All right, don't play dead. Gong Yimo isn't dead. It's just that she was in a hurry to save people and is now rushing to the West Province. You also don't play dead here." His words seemed to be more effective than any miraculous elixir. Gong Che suddenly opened his eyes. What did you say?" His voice was so hoarse, but it was full of disbelief. Shun Shiyi's expression was complicated for a moment, but he didn't turn around. "I said, She's not dead. I personally fished her out of the river. It was also she who wanted me to tell you. Otherwise, who would care if you were dead or alive? After saying this, Shun Sure Yi didn't care where the little bitterness in his heart came from. He strode away, leaving Gong Che lying on the ground in shock. His heart was full of disbelief. Gong Yimo was still alive? Thump thump. At this moment, he felt as if his heart had also skipped a beat. She was still alive? Shin Sure Yi wouldn't lie to him. He disdained lying, so this was true. Immerse was still alive. As soon as Shan Sure Yi left, Empress Lu hurried in. When she came in, she saw that Gong Che had indeed opened his eyes. She was overjoyed. Che, you're finally awake. You're finally awake. Mother, Gong Che was very ashamed. He didn't want it to be like this, but at that time, when he heard the news of Gong Yimo's death, he couldn't control his body's weakness. It was as if her death meant that his life was also cut off. His poor mother, who was worried about him every day and cried. Empress Lu just gently hugged him, afraid to use any strength. She hugged him as if she was holding a rare treasure. It's good that you're awake. It's good that you're awake. Che. The Empress's face was full of tears, but she was so happy that she cried. She hugged him for a while, then as if she remembered something, she quickly called for someone to bring in ginseng tea and medicine. This time, Gong Che finally ate it, and there was a trace of color on his face. As he drank the medicine, he asked the Empress to tell him in detail what happened after he fainted. Last time, when he heard that Gong Yimo was dead, he had a relapse. As for what happened after that, he didn't know. Empress Lu didn't dare to hide anything from him, so she quickly told him everything. Fortunately, other than Gong Yimo's matter, everything else was good. She was released at Gong Yimo's request. The emperor also recognized him as the crown prince because of Gong Yimo's pleas. It could be said that Gong Yimo had helped them countless times. So when Empress Lu said this, she was full of gratitude. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.